Hello there, and welcome to our quiet corner of the cosmos. I'm so glad you could be here tonight. Have you ever wondered, in a moment of stillness, about the worlds that came before our own? Not just worlds of stone and dust, but living worlds, breathing worlds that existed so long ago they feel more like a dream than a memory of our planet. What if we could drift back to a time when the air itself was different, when the forests were made of plants we would not recognise, and when the ancestors of dragonflies soared on wings the size of a hawk's? Tonight we're going to take just such a journey, leaving the familiar shores of our own time to visit a lost chapter in Earth's long story. There is no need to concentrate or to try and remember anything at all. The purpose of this journey is simply to wonder and to rest. So I invite you now to settle in, to let your body feel heavy and supported, and to give yourself permission to let go of the day. There is nothing left for you to do but to breathe and to listen. Before we begin our journey into the deep past, I'd love to know where you're settling in from this evening. If you feel moved to do so, feel free to share your corner of the world in the comments below, a little signal from one quiet room to another. And if you find a sense of peace in these explorations, a gentle like or subscription helps other curious minds find their way to this tranquil space too. Our journey tonight begins not with a step, but with a gentle release, a letting go into the current of what is called deep time. Imagine time not as a clock ticking forward, but as a vast, dark and silent ocean. The surface of this ocean, shimmering with the light of our present moment, is all we ever truly know. It is the world of our own lives, our memories, our histories. But beneath this surface lies an immeasurable depth. Every foot we descend into this ocean takes us 1,000 years into the past. Every mile takes us millions. Tonight we're not just dipping our toes in these waters, we're allowing ourselves to drift all the way down through the layers of recorded history, past the age of pyramids and empires, deeper still, past the last ice age and the time of mammoths and saber-toothed cats. We sink further, past the dawn of humanity itself, the water growing stiller and darker as the familiar world dissolves above us. We pass the age of the dinosaurs, a great and dramatic chapter in Earth's story, but our destination lies even deeper. We are sinking through 200 million, then 250 million years, into a realm of time so ancient it is almost beyond imagining. The pressure here is not one of weight, but of immense, profound stillness. It is the quiet of a world that has been sleeping for eons. Our destination is a specific layer in this deep ocean of time, a period known to science as the Carboniferous. It is a world that existed roughly 359 to 299 million years ago. The name may sound technical, but its meaning is beautifully simple. It comes from the word carbon, because this was the age when the vast majority of our planet's coal was formed, from forests of a scale and strangeness that the world has never seen before or since. This is the shore we are seeking in the depths of time's ocean. We are travelling to a world where the continents were not as we know them, where the very air had a different substance to it, and where life, having firmly conquered the land, was experimenting with forms of breathtaking size and beauty. So let us continue to drift, leaving the anxieties and the pace of our modern world far, far behind on that distant sunlit surface. Here, in the quiet depths of the past, there is only a slow, unfolding story. Let the gentle current carry you now as we prepare to set foot on the shores of this forgotten age, the age of giant insects. As our consciousness settles upon this ancient shoreline, the first thing we might notice is that the world itself feels different under our feet. The map of the Earth that is so familiar to us, with its 7 distinct continents separated by vast oceans, simply did not exist here. Instead, during this long ago time, the planet's land masses were gathered together in a single, immense supercontinent. Geologists have given this great land a name, Pangaea. You can imagine it as if all the countries and continents we know today were pieces of a puzzle that have been brought together, nestled into one another to form a single, unified shape. North and South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia and Antarctica all were part of this one colossal land. This gathering of the continents had a profound effect on the entire planet. The very feeling of the world, its weather, its oceans, its life, was shaped by this unity. With only one supercontinent, there was also only one superocean, a body of water called Panthalassa that stretched from horizon to horizon. The familiar currents of the Atlantic and Pacific were millions of years in the future. Instead, a slow, global current would have circled this single landmass, bringing a uniform warmth across its many shores. The interior of this great land, far from the moderating influence of the sea, would have been a place of extremes, perhaps vast, arid deserts where little could grow. But our journey takes us to the coastlines, particularly the wide, flat tropical belt that straddled the equator. Here, the proximity of the warm, shallow seas created a world that was perpetually damp, humid, and stable. There were no great mountain ranges like the Himalayas or the Andes to block the flow of moisture-laden air. The land lay low and open to the sea, creating vast swampy plains that stretched for thousands of miles. It is in these equatorial regions of Pangaea that the story of the giant insects unfolds. The world felt larger, perhaps, but also more intimate. Life did not exist in isolated pockets on separate continents, as it does today. Instead, it was part of one continuous, unbroken ecosystem that wrapped around the middle of the planet. A creature born on the land that would one day become North America could, in theory, walk to the land that would become China, without ever crossing a major ocean. This single, connected landscape allowed for the great forests of the Carboniferous to spread and spread, creating a green belt around the planet's waste. It was a world without borders, a world of immense, quiet unity, a single sleeping landmass dreaming under an ancient sun. And it was this unique geography, this huddling together of the world's lands, that set the stage for a global climate unlike any in our own experience. As we feel the presence of this single great continent of Pangaea, we also become aware of the air that surrounds us. It is thick, warm, and heavy with moisture. The climate of the Carboniferous Period, particularly in the equatorial regions where we find ourselves, was one of an eternal global summer. If our own world experiences a beautiful variety of seasons, the crisp cold of winter, the gentle warmth of spring, the heat of summer, and the coolness of autumn, the Carboniferous world knew only one long, unbroken season of growth. The primary reason for this profound warmth was the composition of the atmosphere itself. The air contained significantly higher concentrations of carbon dioxide than our modern air. This gas acted like a planetary blanket, trapping the sun's heat and wrapping the Earth in a gentle, pervasive warmth. This is what scientists call a greenhouse climate. Because of this natural atmospheric blanket, the temperature differences between the equator and the poles were much less extreme than they are today. While our journey is focused on the tropical heart of Pangaea, it's important to imagine that even the regions destined to become Siberia or Antarctica were likely temperate and green, perhaps covered in cool, damp forests. For most of this period, there were no permanent ice caps at the poles. The planet's water was not locked away as ice. It was all in a liquid state, in the vast Panthalasic ocean, and in the very air itself, contributing to the thick, soupy humidity. This lack of polar ice meant that sea levels were much higher than they are today. Vast, shallow seas spread into the low-lying interiors of the continent, creating immense waterlogged coastal plains. These were the great coal swamps, and they were the nurseries of the gigantism we have come to explore. The stability of this climate was its most important feature. For millions upon millions of years, the temperature and humidity remained remarkably constant. There were no sudden cold snaps, no devastating droughts in these regions, no seasons of frost to kill back the vegetation. This endless summer provided the perfect conditions for life to flourish without interruption. It was a world without pause, a world of ceaseless, boundless growth. The plants did not need to die back in winter. They could just keep growing year after year, century after century, reaching for the sky. This constant, supercharged growth of plant life, on a scale the planet had never seen before, would have a profound consequence. For it was these very plants that were beginning to change the world, creating the conditions for the next chapter of our story, in the first great forest that covered the land. Standing now within this perpetual humid summer, our senses begin to adjust to the landscape that stretches out before us. We find ourselves at the edge of a forest, but it is a forest unlike any we have ever known. These are the first truly great planet-spanning forests in the history of life on Earth. Before this time, plant life on land was modest, small, low-lying greenery clinging to the water's edge. But here, in the Carboniferous, plants had made a revolutionary leap. They had learned to grow tall, developing strong, woody tissues that allowed them to reach incredible heights in a competition for sunlight. As we gaze into this forest, the first thing we notice is the sheer density of it. The trees stand shoulder to shoulder, their strange forms creating a thick, almost impenetrable wall of green. The light that filters down to the forest floor is dim and hazy, tinted by the canopy far above. There are no flowers to be seen. The air is not filled with the sweet scent of blossoms, because flowers had not yet evolved. There are no fruit trees, no broad-leafed maples or oaks, no pine trees with their familiar needles. The entire architecture of this woodland is alien. Instead, the canopy is dominated by bizarre and beautiful plants that are now long extinct, or which exist today only in humble miniature forms. There are giant club mosses, called lycopods, that soar to over 100 feet, their trunks covered in a distinctive diamond-shaped pattern of leaf scars. There are towering horsetails called calamites, which grew like colossal, segmented bamboo, reaching 60 feet or more into the sky. And everywhere there are ferns. Not just the delicate ferns of our modern woodlands, but tree ferns with thick fibrous trunks and sprawling canopies of intricate fronds. These three types of plants, giant club mosses, giant horsetails and tree ferns, form the backbone of the Carboniferous forest. They created a multi-layered world of deep shade and dappled light, a silent green kingdom. The forest floor is a thick carpet of damp, decaying plant matter. Leaves, spores, and entire fallen trees lie in the stagnant, oxygen-poor water of the swamp, beginning the long, slow process of becoming coal. This endless accumulation of plant debris is a key feature of this age. In our world, fallen trees are efficiently broken down by fungi and bacteria, but many of those decomposers had not yet evolved, so the wood simply piled up, layer upon layer, for millions of years. This was a world being buried by its own incredible vitality, and as these first great forests spread across the tropical belt of Pangaea, they began to act as a single planetary lung, breathing in the carbon dioxide that kept the world warm, and breathing out something else entirely. They were changing the very air, filling it with a substance that would fuel the age of giants. As we stand at the edge of this ancient alien forest, let us take a moment to focus on the simple act of breathing. Let us imagine taking a breath of carboniferous air. It would feel different. It would feel thicker, richer, and more potent than the air of our own time. This strange quality of the air is the central secret, the magic ingredient that made the world of giant insects possible. The relentless global-scale photosynthesis of the new forests was tipping the planet's atmospheric balance. These trees were like a vast green engine, and for millions of years they were drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and using it to build their colossal trunks and fronds, and with every molecule of carbon dioxide they absorbed, they released a molecule of oxygen. Because the vast quantities of fallen wood were not decaying and releasing their carbon back into the air, this process was incredibly one-sided. The oxygen levels just kept rising. In our modern world, oxygen makes up about 21% of the atmosphere. It is the perfect amount for us, for the animals and plants we know. But in the Carboniferous period, the oxygen concentration soared, reaching perhaps as high as 35%. This was a world soaked in oxygen. This fundamental difference in the air had profound consequences for every living thing, but especially for insects. You could think of the atmosphere as a kind of nourishing broth for life. The air of the Carboniferous was a much richer, more energy-dense broth than our own. For creatures that breathed it, this air was a super fuel. Every breath brought in more of the life-giving gas, allowing for higher metabolisms, faster growth, and greater reserves of energy. But it did something even more important for insects, something that directly relates to their potential for great size. We will explore this in more detail later, but for now, it is enough to understand that the very way insects breathe is what limits their size in our modern world. Their respiratory system is not as efficient as our own lungs, but in a world with 35% oxygen, that limitation was lifted. The enriched air could penetrate deeper into their bodies, allowing them to grow to sizes that seem monstrous and impossible to us today. This oxygen-rich air had other strange properties too. It would have been denser than our air. Flying would have been easier, requiring less effort. A creature could achieve lift with less work, as if the air itself were more buoyant, more supportive. Wildfires, when they occurred, would have been terrifyingly intense, burning hotter and faster in the oxygen-rich environment. So as we stand here, on the cusp of entering this lost world, we pause to appreciate its most vital and invisible feature. The air is thick with life-giving potential. It is a powerful, invisible current flowing through the giant ferns and club mosses, and it is this air, this thick and potent atmosphere, that will allow us to witness creatures of a scale and wonder that our own world can no longer support. Having sensed the richness of this ancient air, we can now gently turn our attention to its source. The high oxygen atmosphere of the Carboniferous was not a random occurrence. It was a direct consequence of the boundless green that had wrapped itself around the planet's waist. It was a byproduct of life itself, on a scale that had never before been possible. The process at the heart of this transformation is one that is familiar to us, yet here it was operating at an almost unimaginable intensity. Photosynthesis. We can think of each leaf and frond in these vast forests as a tiny silent factory, powered by the light of the ancient sun. These factories took in the most common of materials, water from the swampy ground and carbon dioxide from the air. Using the sun's energy, they performed a quiet miracle. They broke apart these simple molecules and rearranged them, creating the complex sugars that fuel their own growth, building the very substance of their leaves and trunks. And in this process, they released a waste product. That waste product was oxygen. In our own world, this process is part of a beautiful, balanced cycle. When plants and animals die, decomposers like fungi and bacteria break down their bodies, and in their own process of respiration, they use up oxygen and release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. The books are balanced. The carbon that was borrowed by the plant is returned. But in the Carboniferous swamps, this cycle was broken. The forests were producing organic matter, wood, leaves, spores, at a furious rate. But the decomposers, particularly the microbes that could efficiently break down the tough, woody lignin, had not yet fully evolved. So, when 100-foot-tall club moss fell into the stagnant, oxygen-poor water of the swamp, it did not rot away completely. Instead, it was buried by layers of mud and the debris of other fallen plants. The carbon that it had taken from the atmosphere to build its body was not returned. It was trapped, sequestered, and buried. It was a one-way journey for carbon, from the air into the ground. And because the oxygen that was released when that carbon was captured had nowhere to go, it simply accumulated in the atmosphere. For millions of years, this imbalance continued. The silent, tireless work of the swamp forests was, in essence, pumping oxygen into the sky, while burying the carbon deep within the earth. It was an accidental feat of global engineering, performed by unthinking plants. They were slowly creating their own legacy, the vast seams of coal that give the period its name, and in doing so, they were creating an atmosphere that would allow for an entirely new scale of animal life. This high-oxygen world was a fleeting, temporary gift from this unique period of boundless green. Now that we understand where this oxygen-rich air came from, we can explore the beautiful, simple reason why it was the key that unlocked the door to insect gigantism. The secret lies in the fundamentally different way that insects breathe compared to us. We and other vertebrates have lungs. We take in air, and our blood, filled with oxygen-carrying cells, transports that oxygen to every corner of our body. It is a highly efficient active delivery system. Insects, however, do not have lungs or a similar blood-based delivery system for oxygen. Instead, they have a network of tiny tubes called tracheae. These tubes open to the outside world through a series of small pores on the sides of their bodies called spiracles. This network of tubes branches into smaller and smaller tubules, which run throughout the insect's body, delivering oxygen directly to the cells. The metaphor that helps us understand this is to imagine these tracheal tubes as tiny straws. An insect's body is filled with a vast network of these delicate straws, and air simply diffuses down them from the outside. It is a passive system. There is no diaphragm, no powerful pump to force the air in and out. The oxygen must make its own way from the spiracle to the muscle or organ that needs it. In our modern atmosphere, with its 21% oxygen, this system has a critical limitation, and that limitation is size. There is a maximum distance that oxygen can effectively travel down one of these straws. If an insect gets too large, the straws needed to reach the inner parts of its body become too long. By the time the air reaches the end of the tube, most of the oxygen has been used up, and the cells deep inside the body would suffocate. This physical constraint is the primary reason why there are no insects the size of dogs or eagles in our world today. Their respiratory system is simply not efficient enough to support such a large body mass. But in the Carboniferous, the rules were different. The air itself was so much richer in oxygen, containing up to 35%. This changes everything. Imagine our metaphor of the tiny straws again. If the air entering the straw is much more concentrated with oxygen, then even as it travels down the tube and diffuses to the surrounding tissues, there is still plenty of oxygen left to reach the very end. The effective length of each straw is dramatically increased. The passive diffusion-based system suddenly becomes viable for a much, much larger body. The limitation on size was lifted. The thicker, richer sky meant that the internal architecture of the insect could be scaled up without the risk of suffocation. This is the simple, elegant explanation for our giant insects. It wasn't a magical force or a strange gravity. It was a direct consequence of the chemistry of the air and the beautiful, simple physics of gas diffusion. The very breath of the planet had changed, and in doing so, it gave life the permission to experiment with a new and wonderful scale. The high oxygen levels did more than just allow for larger bodies. They also acted as a powerful fuel for the internal fire of life, metabolism. Every living creature, from the smallest bacterium to the largest whale, is a tiny, slow-burning fire. We take in fuel in the form of food, and we use the oxygen we breathe to burn that fuel, releasing the energy that powers our movement, our growth, and our thoughts. The more oxygen available, the more efficiently and intensely that fire can burn. In the Carboniferous world, the enriched air was like adding a supercharger to this process. For the insects and other arthropods of this time, every breath brought in a more potent dose of the gas they needed to power their bodies. This had several profound effects. Firstly, it would have allowed for a much higher metabolic rate. Creatures could generate energy more quickly. This means they could likely move faster, fly with greater power, and sustain energetic activity for longer periods. Imagine a griffinfly, which we will meet soon, with its 2.5-foot wingspan. Powering the muscles for those enormous wings would have required a tremendous amount of energy, and the oxygen-rich air provided the fuel for that incredible biological engine. Secondly, this supercharged metabolism would have fueled rapid growth. From the moment a nymph hatched from its egg, the abundance of oxygen would have allowed it to process food more efficiently and convert it into body mass at an accelerated rate. Life could move from one stage to the next more quickly, reaching its full, magnificent size in a shorter amount of time. This energetic advantage was not limited to the giants. All life in the Carboniferous would have felt its effects. The amphibians, the first vertebrates to walk on land, would have benefited. The fish in the sea, the spiders and scorpions on the forest floor, all were living in a world where the fundamental process of generating energy from food was easier and more efficient. It created a world of high energy, of vibrant and supercharged life. The very pace of existence might have felt different. It is a quiet and beautiful thought that the silent work of the swamp forests breathing out all of that oxygen was not just changing the air, but was also infusing the creatures of the world with a vitality and an energy that our own world, in its perfect balance, cannot replicate. It was a unique time when the fire of life was permitted to burn at its brightest. Beyond the profound biological effects of the Carboniferous atmosphere, there was a subtle but important physical consequence as well. The air itself was denser, with a higher percentage of oxygen, which is a slightly denser gas than nitrogen, and a generally warmer, more humid composition. The overall density of the air at sea level would have been greater than it is today. This might seem like a small detail, but for any creature that moved through the air, it would have made a world of difference. The principle is the same one that allows a ship to float on water or a hot air balloon to rise. An object moving through a fluid, and air is a fluid, is supported by that fluid. A denser fluid provides more support. For the flying insects of the Carboniferous, this denser air would have been a great blessing. It would have made flight easier, more efficient and more forgiving. We can imagine this by thinking of a bird in our own world. It must work tirelessly, flapping its wings to generate lift and stay aloft in our relatively thin air. Now imagine that same bird flying through an atmosphere that is, say, 20% denser. It would be like a swimmer moving through salt water instead of fresh water. The denser medium provides more buoyancy. The bird would find that it could generate the same amount of lift with less effort. It could glide for longer distances, carry heavier loads, and maneuver with greater ease. This is the world that the first giant flying insects were born into. For the magnificent griffin fly, with its enormous wingspan, this added buoyancy would have been a crucial advantage. It would have reduced the immense energy cost of keeping its large body in the air, allowing it to soar and hunt over the great coal swamps for hours on end. The air itself was helping to hold it up. This principle also applies to the very smallest of flying things. The air would have been thick with spores from the giant ferns and club mosses, and this denser atmosphere would have allowed them to stay suspended for longer, travelling further on the gentle breezes. It was a sky that was more capable of carrying things, from the largest flyers to the smallest motes of life. This physical property of the air, this added buoyancy, worked in perfect harmony with the biological benefits of high oxygen, creating the ultimate set of conditions for the evolution of flight on a grand scale. As we contemplate this world of supercharged life and buoyant air, it is important to remember that this state of being was not permanent. The high oxygen world of the Carboniferous was not a stable, enduring condition for our planet. It was, in the grand scheme of Earth's history, a beautiful and fleeting imbalance. The Earth's systems, over millions of years, are always seeking a state of equilibrium. The relationship between the atmosphere, the oceans, and life itself is a slow, patient dance, and the Carboniferous period represents a moment when one partner in that dance, life, took a dramatic and powerful lead. The boundless green of the forests was drawing carbon out of the system faster than it could be returned, and the result was this temporary spike in atmospheric oxygen. But such an imbalance cannot last forever. The planet's thermostat, governed by the carbon cycle, would eventually begin to correct itself. The very success of the plants would sow the seeds of the world's next transformation. As we'll see later, the climate would eventually begin to cool as carbon dioxide levels dropped. Geologic activity would change, and new forms of life, like the fungi that could finally break down wood, would evolve and begin to restore the balance, returning carbon to the atmosphere and slowly, over millions of years, bringing the oxygen levels back down. So the world we are visiting tonight is a special one. It is a snapshot of our planet in a unique and temporary state. It is like holding your breath for a moment. The Carboniferous was the period where the planet took a great, deep, green breath and held it for 60 million years. And in that long, oxygen-rich pause, these incredible forms of life were given a window of opportunity to exist. Knowing that this world was temporary gives it a certain preciousness. The giant insects were not a mistake or a monstrous aberration. They were a perfect and beautiful adaptation to a set of environmental conditions that will likely never be repeated. They were the children of the thick sky and the endless summer. As we prepare to step into the cold swamp forests themselves, let us carry this understanding with us. We are entering a world that was living in a moment of brilliant, beautiful imbalance, a moment that could not last, but which produced wonders that still echo in the story of our planet. With a sense of the potent, oxygen-rich air filling our imaginary lungs, we now step forward, moving from the edge of the great forest into its depths. The world closes in around us, and we are immediately enveloped in a deep green and profound silence. This is a forest, yes, but it is a forest of an entirely different character and mood than any woodland of our own time. The familiar sights, sounds, and smells that we associate with a walk in the woods are absent here. Take a moment to listen. There is no bird song. Birds have not yet evolved. The complex chorus of chirps, whistles, and calls that fills our modern forests is millions of years in the future. The silence is deep, broken only by the gentle whisper of wind through the strange feathery leaves of the canopy far above, and perhaps the distant low croak of an amphibian near the water's edge. There is no buzzing of bees or flies as we know them. While there are insects, the high-pitched hum of the modern insect world is missing. The primary sound is one of immense green quiet. Now, consider the smells. The air does not carry the sweet perfume of flowers. The beautiful, intricate dance between flowering plants and their insect pollinators has not yet begun. The forest smells not of blossoms, but of damp earth, of wet, decaying vegetation, of fermentation, and of the rich, peaty smell of the swamp. It is a primal, elemental scent, the smell of life and decay in a simple, endless cycle. And then there is the visual landscape. As our eyes adjust to the dim, filtered light, the alien architecture of the forest reveals itself. The trees that surround us are not trees in the way we understand them. They are not oaks, or pines, or birches. They are monumental versions of plants we might recognise only as small, humble inhabitants of our own world's wetlands. Their trunks are not covered in familiar bark, but in strange, repeating patterns of scales and segments. The canopy above is not a mosaic of broad leaves, but a feathery ceiling of giant fronds and needle-like whorls. There is a strange, almost geometric quality to this forest. It is a world of fractals and repeating patterns, a mathematical garden built on a colossal scale. The ground beneath our feet is not solid earth, but a spongy, saturated mat of fallen plant matter, resting over dark, stagnant water. This is the coal swamp. The forest is growing directly out of a shallow, slow-moving body of water, and it is into this water that the dead plants fall, becoming the raw material for the coal that will power a distant future. This is a world of vertical lines and deep shadows, a place of profound tranquility and strangeness. We are walking through a landscape that is both a nursery of life and a tomb, a place where the sun's energy is being captured, used, and then buried, layer by silent layer. As we venture deeper into this silent green world, our gaze is drawn upward toward the titans of this alien forest. The most dominant and imposing figures in this landscape are the giant club mosses, particularly a genus known as lepidodendron, or the scale tree. To call it a club moss is almost misleading, as the modern club mosses we might find on a forest floor are tiny creeping plants, rarely more than a few inches tall. The lepidodendron of the Carboniferous, by contrast, was a true giant, a pillar of life that soared to heights of over 100 feet and sometimes as much as 150 feet. Its trunk was thick and straight, often reaching 6 feet in diameter at its base. But what truly sets it apart, what makes it so utterly strange to our eyes, is its bark. The trunk is not covered in the rough, furrowed bark of a modern tree. Instead, it is adorned with a beautiful and remarkably regular pattern of diamond-shaped leaf scars. These scars were left behind as the tree grew and shed its needle-like leaves. The effect is that the entire trunk appears to be covered in a mosaic of reptilian scales, hence its common name, the scale tree. It looks less like a plant and more like the leg of some colossal sleeping dragon. For most of its immense height, the trunk of the lepidodendron is unbranched, a single straight column reaching for the hazy sunlight. Only at the very top does it finally branch out, creating a modest crown of forked limbs. From the ends of these branches sprout dense clusters of long, thin leaves, like green bottle brushes held against the sky. The tree did not produce seeds. Instead, it reproduced using spores, which were grown in cone-like structures at the tips of its branches. The air in this forest would have been thick with this fine, golden dust of spores settling on every surface. The root system of these giants was also unique. Instead of a single deep taproot, the lepidodendron had a shallow system of radiating, forked roots known as stigmaria. These fossils are so common and distinctive that for a long time, scientists thought they were a completely different type of plant. These roots spread out through the soft, mucky soil of the swamp, anchoring the colossal tree in the unstable ground. These scale trees were not long-lived like our ancient redwoods or oaks. They grew incredibly fast thanks to the rich carbon dioxide and the endless summer, reaching their full towering height in perhaps just 10 to 15 years. They would stand for a time as silent green pillars, and then they would fall, crashing into the swampy water to begin their long transformation into coal. Standing at the base of one of these giants, we feel a sense of profound geometric awe. They are the silent, scaly kings of this lost world, their patterned trunks rising like columns in a vast green cathedral. Sharing the canopy with the scaly giants are the second great pillars of the Carboniferous forest, the towering horsetails, known to science as calamites. These plants are another example of a humble modern plant achieving breathtaking size in this ancient world. The horsetails we might see today are small reed-like plants that grow in damp places, often considered a weed. They have a distinctive segmented stem and whorls of thin needle-like leaves. Now imagine this simple body plan scaled up to the size of a telephone pole. The calamites of the Carboniferous grew to heights of 60 to 90 feet, with thick, woody and hollow stems that could be a foot or more in diameter. Like their modern relatives and like bamboo, their trunks were clearly segmented. At each joint or node, a beautiful whirl of long, slender leaves would radiate outwards, like the spokes of a delicate wheel. This structure repeated itself all the way up the towering stem, giving the entire plant a wonderfully architectural and rhythmic appearance. While the lepidodendron scale trees gave the forest a sense of massive reptilian grandeur, the calamites added a touch of elegance and delicate structure. They often grew in dense thickets, their straight jointed trunks forming a kind of living colonnade along the edges of the swamps and waterways. The light filtering through their sparse needle-like foliage would have created a unique pattern of shadows on the forest floor, a gentle striped light falling across the dark water. Like the scale trees, calamites did not produce seeds. They also reproduced by releasing vast quantities of spores from small cones that grew at the top of the plant. They were also fast-growing, shooting up quickly to compete for a place in the sun. Their root systems were extensive underground runners called rhizomes, from which new shoots could sprout. This is why they often formed such dense clonal groves, a forest within the forest, all interconnected beneath the swampy soil. Standing among a thicket of these giant horsetails would feel like being in a vast, quiet hall of pillars. The air would be still, the light striped and serene. The segmented trunks would create a sense of order and repetition, a natural architecture that is both strange and calming. They were the graceful, jointed giants of the coal swamps, a testament to the simple, beautiful forms that life could achieve in this time of boundless growth. Together with the scale trees, they defined the very structure of this alien woodland, a world built from moss and reeds, magnified to a monumental scale. While the giant club, mosses and horsetails formed the high canopy, the space below them was not empty. The middle layer and the undergrowth of the Carboniferous forest were dominated by the lush and intricate world of ferns. Here again, we encounter a familiar group of plants, but on a scale and in a variety that is staggering. There were, of course, ferns that were very similar to those we know today, creating a dense green carpet across the damp ground. Their delicate fronds, with their beautiful repeating fractal patterns, would have covered every available surface, softening the edges of the landscape and creating a sense of deep, verdant abundance. But alongside these were the tree ferns, plants that had evolved thick, fibrous trunks that could lift their magnificent canopies of fronds 20 or 30 feet into the air. These tree ferns filled the mid-level of the forest, creating a sub-canopy of sprawling lace-like leaves. They thrived in the dim, humid environment beneath the towering scale trees, capturing the dappled light that filtered down from above. Their presence would have made the forest feel even more dense and layered, a multi-storied world of green. But perhaps the most important ferns in this ecosystem were a group known as the seed ferns. To our eyes, They would have looked almost identical to other ferns, with the same complex and beautiful fronds. However, they possessed a revolutionary biological innovation. They had evolved the ability to produce seeds. This was a monumental step in the history of plant life. Before this, all plants were tied to wet environments, as their spores needed water to complete their life cycle. The seed, however, was a tiny, self-contained life support system. It packaged an embryonic plant together with a food supply, all wrapped in a tough protective coat. A seed could lie dormant for long periods. It could travel further, and it could survive in much drier conditions. While the great swamp forests were still dominated by spore-bearing plants, the quiet evolution of the seed in these humble-looking ferns was a sign of the future. It was the invention that would eventually allow plants to conquer the drier interiors of the continents and create the kinds of forest we know today. So, as we imagine ourselves in this undergrowth, we are surrounded by a sea of green. We are in a world of fronds, a world of intricate, delicate patterns repeated on 1,000 different scales. The air is still and heavy, and the light is a dim emerald haze. We are standing at the heart of the great green engine that is driving this world, and we are witnessing both the peak of an old way of life, the spore-bearing giants, and the quiet birth of a new one, hidden in the fronds of the first seed ferns. Let us pause for a moment on the forest floor and focus again on the sensory experience of this place. We have spoken of the alien sights and the damp, earthy smells, but it is the quality of the sound, or the lack of it, that truly defines the mood of the coal swamp. The silence here is a deep and profound thing. It is not an empty silence, but a full one, a presence in itself. It is the sound of a world before our own, a world moving to a different, slower rhythm. In a modern forest, the air is alive with sound. There is the constant, complex symphony of birdsong, the territorial calls, the warning cries, the simple, beautiful melodies. There is the busy hum of insects, the buzzing of bees, the droning of flies, the chirping of crickets at dusk. There is the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, a squirrel scrambling up a tree, a mouse scurrying through the leaves. These are the sounds we associate with a living woodland. Here, in the Carboniferous, all of that is absent. The air is not filled with the vibrations of wings or voices as we know them. The silence is broken only by the most elemental of sounds. There is the gentle, persistent whisper of the wind moving through the feathery leaves of the canopy, a sound like a soft, long exhalation. There might be the slow, steady drip of water from a fern frond down to the swampy surface below, and if we are near a body of open water, we might hear the low guttural croak or splash of an amphibian, one of the first vertebrate voices on the planet. And of course, there would be the sounds made by the giant arthropods themselves. Not vocalizations, but the incidental sounds of their movement. The soft, rhythmic rustle of a giant millipede making its way through the leaf litter. The faint clatter of its many legs on a fallen log. The sudden, sharp snap of a griffinfly's wings as it darts through a clearing. A sound that would cut through the silence for a moment before fading away. This profound quiet changes the entire feeling of the landscape. It creates a sense of immense peace, of tranquility, and of great antiquity. It feels like a meditative space, a world that is not busy, not hurried. Life here is slow, patient, and silent. As we stand in this deep green hush, we can feel the planet dreaming. We are in a place of pure, unadorned nature, a world without the complex sounds of the animal kingdom that would one day inherit it. It is a silence that invites us to listen more closely, not with our ears, but with our whole being, to the slow, steady pulse of this ancient, sleeping world. As we stand in the profound silence of the forest floor, our attention is drawn to the air itself, which seems to shimmer in the dim light. The air is thick with a fine, almost invisible dust. This dust is the very essence of the forest continuity, the method by which this boundless green reproduces and perpetuates itself. This is a world largely ruled by spores. The giant club mosses, the towering horsetails, and most of the ferns all relied on this ancient method of reproduction. A spore is a tiny single cell protected by a tough outer wall. It is the simplest possible package of genetic information, a microscopic promise of a new plant. The great trees of this era produced spores in unimaginable quantities, releasing them from their cones and fronds into the thick, buoyant air. The atmosphere was a great global river of spores, carrying them on the gentle winds to new locations. When a spore landed in a suitably damp place, it would begin to grow, but it did not grow directly into a new giant tree. Instead, it grew into a tiny intermediate plant called a gametophyte. This small, often heart-shaped plant would then produce the reproductive cells, the eggs and sperm. And here was the critical limitation. The sperm needed to swim through a thin film of water to reach the egg and fertilize it. This is why the spore-bearing plants, no matter how tall and mighty they grew, were forever tied to the swamp. They needed that constant moisture, that wet environment to complete their life cycle. Their children had to be born in water. But as we've learned, something new was happening quietly in the undergrowth. Among the ferns, a revolutionary new strategy had emerged: the seed. The seed ferns had decoupled reproduction from the need for standing water. The entire process of fertilization now happened safely within the parent plant. The result was not a single vulnerable spore, but a complex multicellular seed. A seed is like a tiny travelling egg. It contains the plant embryo, a prepackaged supply of food to nourish it during its first days of growth, and a durable protective seed coat to shield it from the harsh environment. It was a complete life support system in miniature. This innovation was as significant for the plant kingdom as the evolution of the shelled egg would be for the vertebrates. It was the key to unlocking the entire planet. While the spore bearers ruled the lush, wet world of the Carboniferous, it was the humble seed ferns that held the future in their fronds. They were developing the toolkit that would allow plant life to finally leave the swamp and conquer the drier lands, paving the way for the new forests and new worlds that would follow this one. We now lift our gaze from the forest floor up past the towering patterned trunks and into the open spaces above the canopy. In the hazy, oxygen-rich sky, we witness the undisputed masters of this domain, the giant dragonflies. The most famous of these is Meganura, a creature that pushes the boundaries of what we imagine an insect can be. It is, for all intents and purposes, a giant dragonfly, but of a scale that is simply breathtaking. While the largest dragonflies in our world today might have a wingspan of 6 or 7 inches, Meganura and its relatives sported wingspans of up to 2.5 feet. This is the size of a crow or a seagull. To see one of these magnificent creatures soaring through the air would be a vision of both beauty and awe. They were the apex predators of the Carboniferous skies. There were no birds yet to challenge them, and the first flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, were still many millions of years in the future. For this long moment in Earth's history, the sky belonged entirely to the insects, and the dragonflies were their kings and queens. Their flight would have been a spectacle of power and grace. The denser, more buoyant air would have allowed them to glide for long distances with effortless ease. Their 4 huge wings held out stiffly as they surveyed their domain. Then, with a sudden burst of power from their enormous flight muscles supercharged by the rich atmosphere, they could accelerate with incredible speed, twisting and turning in pursuit of their prey. Their hunting grounds were the clearings in the forest, the wide swampy rivers, and the open air above the endless green canopy. They were the guardians of the space between the earth and the sky. The presence of such a large and dominant aerial predator would have shaped the entire ecosystem. It would have put evolutionary pressure on other smaller flying insects to become faster and more agile to evade capture. It may have even influenced the behaviour of the early amphibians, who would have had to be wary of these huge hunters swooping down from above. Imagine the sight. A creature with the delicate, intricate body of a dragonfly, but magnified to the size of a bird of prey. Its huge, multifaceted eyes would have been able to see the world in a mosaic of incredible detail, spotting the slightest movement from high above. Its powerful, spiny legs would have been held forward in flight, forming a basket to snatch smaller insects from the air. This was not a monster, but a perfectly adapted, exquisitely designed marvel of the ancient world. It was a living testament to the unique conditions of this time, a creature of the thick air and the endless summer, a shimmering silent ruler of the Carboniferous sky. Let us now imagine one of these magnificent griffinflies coming to rest for a moment on the broad frond of a tree fern. Here, in stillness, we can truly appreciate the intricate beauty of its form. Its most striking features, of course, are its wings. There are 2 pairs of them, and they are enormous, clear, and etched with a complex network of dark veins. This network was not just for decoration. It was a masterpiece of biological engineering. The veins acted as a structural support, giving the vast, thin wing membrane the strength and rigidity it needed to withstand the powerful forces of flight, while also being incredibly lightweight. In the hazy sunlight of the coal swamp, these wings would have caught the light, shimmering with an iridescent rainbow-like sheen, like the surface of an oil slick on still water. They would have looked like 2 pairs of stained glass windows, crafted with a delicacy that belies their incredible strength. The griffinfly's body is long and slender, a streamlined fuselage built for speed. Its thorax, the middle section of its body, is immense. This is because it is packed almost entirely with the massive muscles needed to power its wings. These muscles, fueled by the oxygen-rich air, were the engines that drove this incredible flying machine. At the front of its body is its head, which is dominated by 2 enormous compound eyes. Each eye is a hemisphere composed of thousands of tiny individual lenses, like a honeycomb made of glass. Each lens captures its own small portion of the world, and the griffinfly's brain would have stitched these thousands of images together to create a wide, panoramic view of its surroundings with an incredible sensitivity to movement. These mosaic eyes were perfect tools for an aerial predator, allowing it to spot and track prey with uncanny precision. Below its head, its mouth parts are formidable, a set of sharp mandibles designed for gripping and consuming its prey on the wing. And extending forward from its thorax are its 6 legs, which are long, slender, and covered in sharp spines. As we noted, it would hold these legs together in flight, forming a kind of spiky basket or net. It didn't hunt by biting, but by snatching, using this basket to scoop smaller insects out of the air before consuming them. Seeing this creature up close, we can appreciate it not just for its size, but for its perfection. Every part of its body is exquisitely adapted for its role as a master of the air. It is a creature of shimmering, delicate beauty and formidable, efficient power. It is a jewel of the Carboniferous, a perfect expression of what life could achieve in this unique and forgotten world. The image of its stained glass wings catching the ancient sunlight is one that stays with us, a symbol of the fragile, fleeting beauty of this lost age. The magnificent, shimmering adult griffinfly that ruled the skies was only the final chapter of its life story. Like modern dragonflies, the griffinfly lived a life in 2 worlds, beginning its existence in the dark, swampy waters below the forest. Its life began as a tiny egg, laid by its mother on a submerged plant stem or directly into the water. From this egg hatched not a miniature flying insect, but a creature built for a completely different element, an aquatic nymph. This nymph was a formidable predator in its own right, a true monster of the underwater world of the coal swamp. It looks something like a stocky, wingless version of the adult, with a mottled, brownish body that provided perfect camouflage against the decaying leaf litter at the bottom of the pool. It breathed through gills, extracting the abundant oxygen directly from the water, and it was a patient and deadly hunter. The griffinfly nymph would spend its days lurking in the submerged vegetation, or half buried in the silty bottom, waiting for its prey. It had a secret weapon, a highly specialized lower jaw called a labium, which was folded away beneath its head. This jaw was hinged and could be shot forward with incredible speed, like a spring-loaded trap. At the end of it was a pair of sharp pincers. When an unsuspecting tadpole, small fish, or another insect nymph swam past, the griffinfly nymph would extend this deadly appendage in a fraction of a second, snatching its victim and pulling it back to its mouth. For months, or perhaps even a year or more, it would live this hidden aquatic life, growing larger with each meal, shedding its skin multiple times as it increased in size. It was a vital part of the swamp's underwater ecosystem, a top predator keeping the populations of other small creatures in check. Then, when it reached its final stage of development, A deep, instinctual urge would take hold. On a quiet evening, it would crawl out of the water, climbing up the stalk of a giant horsetail or the trunk of a scale tree. There it would anchor itself firmly, and a final, magical transformation would begin. Its outer skeleton would split down the back, and the adult griffinfly, the creature of the air, would slowly and carefully pull itself free from its old aquatic shell. It would hang there for a time, its new giant wings crumpled and soft. It would pump fluid into them, slowly expanding them to their full, magnificent 2.5-foot span. And as they hardened in the warm, humid air, it would take its first powerful flight, leaving its underwater world behind forever to become a ruler of the sky. Let us now return to the sky and imagine the world from the perspective of the adult griffinfly. Its day is a silent, graceful, and relentless hunt. It does not hunt with sound or fury, but with a patient, focused efficiency that is mesmerizing to behold. From its vantage point high above the canopy, its huge mosaic eyes give it a panoramic view of the world below. It sees not one single image, but 1,000 shimmering pictures, a world of incredible detail and vibrancy. It is especially attuned to motion. The slightest flicker of a smaller insect's wing against the backdrop of the green forest would be instantly registered. It spends much of its time in a state of effortless gliding, riding the gentle thermal updrafts rising from the warm swamp. Its 4 large wings are held out perfectly still as it surveys its territory. This gliding is a way to conserve the immense energy required for powered flight. It is a silent, floating observer, a shimmering cross against the hazy sky. Then it spots something. Perhaps a large primitive cockroach scuttling on a fern frond, or a smaller flying insect moving through a sunbeam. The hunt begins. The griffinfly angles its body downwards, and with a few powerful beats of its wings, it accelerates to an incredible speed. The world would become a blur of green and brown as it zeroes in on its target. It is capable of complex aerial maneuvers, sharp turns, sudden dives, and abrupt stops that would rival any modern fighter jet. It can control its 4 wings independently, allowing for a level of agility that is astonishing for a creature of its size. As it closes in on its prey, it thrusts its spiny legs forward, forming that deadly basket. The final moments of the hunt are swift and silent. It does not chase its prey from behind, but instead calculates a perfect interception course, meeting its target in mid-air. The smaller insect is scooped into the basket of legs, and the griffinfly may consume it right there on the wing, using its powerful mandibles without ever needing to land. Or for a larger meal, it might fly to a nearby perch on a towering scale tree to devour its catch in peace. This is its entire existence, a cycle of silent observation, breathtaking speed, and efficient capture. It is a ballet of life and death played out in the ancient sky, a dance that ensured its own survival and shaped the evolution of the creatures it hunted. It was not cruel or vicious. It was simply a perfect predator, playing its vital role in the complex and beautiful web of life in the Carboniferous world. Our knowledge of these magnificent griffinflies, and indeed of this entire lost world, comes from the faintest of whispers, the most delicate of echoes left behind in stone. We can never watch a living meganure soar through the sky, but we can see its ghost, preserved with miraculous detail in the fossil record. Imagine a griffinfly at the end of its life, its great wings finally still. It falls from the sky and lands in the soft, silty mud at the bottom of a swampy pool. The water here is stagnant and low in oxygen, which slows down the process of decay. Gently, over the seasons, more layers of silt and mud wash over its body, burying it deep within the earth. The soft parts of its body decay, but the tougher parts, especially its magnificent veined wings, are pressed into the fine-grained mud. Over millions of years, the pressure of the layers above and the slow work of minerals in the groundwater turn this mud to stone. The insect itself is long gone, but its impression, its exact shape, remains captured forever. This is how we have come to know them. The most famous fossils of Meganeura were discovered in the coal mines of Commentry, France, in the 1880s. Miners, deep underground, splitting open layers of shale, were the first modern humans to lay eyes on these incredible creatures. They found not bones, but delicate dark imprints in the pale stone, the perfectly preserved wings of an insect the size of a bird. These fossils are like photographs taken across a gulf of 300 million years. We can see the intricate network of veins in the wings, so clear and precise that scientists can use them to understand the aerodynamics of their flight. We can see the outline of their long bodies and their powerful legs. Each fossil is a small miracle, a letter from a lost world. When we look at one of these fossil wings, we are doing something truly amazing. We are connecting our own time to this deep and distant past. We are bridging an unimaginable chasm of time with a simple act of looking. The stone becomes a window, and for a moment we can almost see the shimmer of that wing as it catches the light of a sun that set for the last time hundreds of millions of years ago. It is a humbling and awe-inspiring connection, a reminder that the earth holds its memories deep within its rocky heart. Leaving the open skies and returning to the dim, humid floor of the forest, we encounter a creature of even more astonishing scale than the dragonfly. Flowing silently through the giant ferns and club mosses is Arthropleura, the largest land-dwelling invertebrate that has ever lived. This is the giant millipede of the Carboniferous, and its size is difficult to comprehend. Fossil remains suggest that Arthropleura could reach a length of over 8 feet and a width of nearly 2 feet. It was a true behemoth of the forest floor, a living armoured river of life. When we imagine such a colossal arthropod, our modern sensibilities might lead us to picture a fearsome monster, a terrifying predator. But all the evidence suggests that Arthropleura was the exact opposite. It was a gentle giant. It was not a hunter, but a peaceful herbivore, or more likely a detritivore. Its life was a slow, quiet search for food amongst the rich, decaying plant matter of the swampy ground. Fossilized gut contents and the structure of its mouthparts indicate a diet of rotting vegetation, fallen spores, and perhaps the soft, pulpy tissues of the carboniferous plants. It was the great gardener of this ancient world, a titanic recycler, breaking down the incredible abundance of fallen plant life and returning its nutrients to the ecosystem. Its role was not one of terror, but one of quiet, essential service. To encounter an Arthropleura in its native habitat would likely not be a moment of fear, but one of profound, silent awe. Imagine parting the giant fronds of a fern and seeing this creature moving past. It would not be scuttling or scurrying. Its movement would have been a slow, steady and mesmerizing glide. Its dozens, perhaps hundreds of legs would move in a continuous hypnotic wave, carrying its immense segmented body forward with an inexorable, silent power. It would likely pay us no mind at all. Its simple brain focused entirely on its next meal of damp, decomposing wood or leaves. Its sheer size would have meant it had no natural predators. The large amphibians of the time were simply no match for this armoured giant. It was the peaceful, undisputed king of the undergrowth, a creature that could go about its business without fear. Arthropleura represents a beautiful counterpoint to the high-speed, predatory grace of the dragonfly. It embodies the other side of the carboniferous world, the slow, patient and silent processes of growth and decay happening on the forest floor. It was a creature made possible by the incredible productivity of the forests, a living testament to the sheer amount of biomass that this world was creating. It was not a monster to be feared, but a wonder to be beheld, a gentle armoured titan in a world of green silence. Let us take a closer look at the incredible body of Arthropleura. Its form is a masterclass in arthropod design, scaled up to a size that seems almost impossible. The most defining feature of its body is its segmentation. Like its modern millipede and centipede relatives, its long body was composed of a series of repeated armoured plates called tergites. In Arthropleura, these segments were about 30 in number, and each was incredibly broad and flattened, giving the creature its wide, almost ribbon-like appearance. These plates were made of a tough, durable exoskeleton, the same kind of chitinous material that makes up the shells of modern beetles and crabs. This segmented armour provided both protection and flexibility. The plates would have been connected by a more pliable membrane, allowing the giant creature to bend and curve its long body, navigating the complex terrain of the forest floor, weaving between the trunks of giant horsetails and under the low-hanging fronds of ferns. The armour was not just for defence, it was the entire structural support for its body. Unlike vertebrates, it had no internal skeleton. Its strength came from this external jointed shell. From the sides of each body segment emerged a pair of legs, and it's the legs of Arthropleura that create its most mesmerising feature. It's difficult to know the exact number, but a creature of this size would have had well over 100, perhaps several hundred legs. As it moved, these countless legs would not move randomly. Instead, they would operate in a series of coordinated wave-like motions, a phenomenon called a metachronal rhythm. Imagine watching from the side as it glided past. You would see a continuous, flowing wave pass down the length of its body, each leg lifting and falling in perfect sequence after the one before it. It would have looked like a living, breathing pulse, a current of motion flowing through the still forest. The underside of the creature was likely softer and more vulnerable, which is why its flattened armoured back plates extended out to the sides, providing a protective covering for the legs and underbelly. Its head was small in proportion to its enormous body and housed a simple brain, a pair of antennae to feel and taste the world, and the mouth parts designed for consuming plant matter. It was a simple creature, a long armoured tube of digestion, propelled by 100 waves of legs. But in that simplicity there is a profound beauty. It was a design that was perfectly suited to its world, a form that allowed it to grow to a colossal size and become the quiet, gentle ruler of the Carboniferous undergrowth. Let us now imagine a day in the life of Arthropleura. Its world is the forest floor, a realm of deep shade, constant humidity, and an endless supply of food. The ground is not soil as we know it, but a thick, spongy carpet of decaying leaves, shed bark from the scale trees, fallen fronds, and entire logs lying in the shallow, peaty water. This is the world that Arthropleura was built to inhabit, and in a very real sense to maintain. Its existence is a slow, continuous journey through this layer of debris. It is a quest for sustenance. Guided by its antennae, which would have been constantly tapping and tasting the environment, it moves with its slow, inexorable glide, seeking out the richest pockets of decomposition. It is not a grazer of living plants, but a connoisseur of decay. It would have used its powerful mouthparts to break down the soft, waterlogged tissues of fallen club mosses or the nutrient-rich humus that was forming on the forest floor. In this way, Arthropleura was a keystone species in the Carboniferous ecosystem. It was a vital link in the nutrient cycle. As we know, the process of decomposition was slow in this era. By consuming and breaking down the vast amounts of dead plant matter, Arthropleura was helping to speed up that process. It was unlocking the nutrients and energy stored in the dead trees and returning them to the swamp, making them available for the next generation of plants. It was a titanic composter, a silent, tireless gardener tending to the health of the entire forest. Its life would have been one of simple sensory inputs. The feeling of the damp ground beneath its hundreds of feet, the taste and smell of the rich decaying world, the perception of light and shadow through its simple eyes. It would have had no complex social life, no need for communication beyond the most basic instincts. Its days were solitary and peaceful. It would have sought out the dampest areas, as its arthropod body was still vulnerable to drying out despite its armour. It may have even spent time partially submerged in the shallow, stagnant waters of the swamp, moving through the water with the same slow, wave-like motion of its legs. Its life was a quiet, unassuming one, but it was a life of profound importance. It was one of the great engines of the forest floor, a creature whose slow, patient work helped to sustain the very world that had given it such incredible size. It was a life lived in the shadows among the fallen, a gentle giant performing a crucial silent task. Let us now try to imagine the world from Arthropleura's own perspective. Our human experience is a vertical one. We stand tall, our eyes 5 or 6 feet from the ground, looking out and over the landscape. Arthropleura's experience was profoundly horizontal. Its simple eyes were only inches from the forest floor. Its world was not a grand vista, but an intimate, close-up view of the ground. From its low perspective, the forest would have seemed even more colossal and imposing. The bases of the scale trees and giant horsetails would not have been trunks, but massive patterned cliffs disappearing up into an unseen hazy ceiling of green. A fallen log would not be an obstacle to step over, but a mountain to be climbed. A clump of ferns would not be a patch of greenery, but a dense and intricate jungle to be navigated. Its world was a maze of towering stalks, sprawling roots, and deep, damp canyons of decaying leaves. The sensory information it received would be primarily tactile and chemical. Its long antennae would be its primary tools for exploring this world, constantly sweeping ahead, tasting the air, and touching the surfaces before it. It would feel the texture of the scaly bark of a lepidodendron, the soft, spongy surface of a rotting log, the cool slickness of mud. Its world was a tapestry of textures, temperatures, and tastes. The sounds it would have perceived would have been vibrations travelling through the ground rather than through the air. The heavy footfall of a large amphibian nearby, the crash of a distant falling tree, these would be felt as much as heard, a deep, resonant tremor in the earth. The light in its world was a perpetual twilight, a dim, green-filtered gloom, punctuated by the occasional brilliant shaft of sunlight that managed to pierce the dense canopy far above. These patches of light would be fleeting moments of brightness in a world of deep shade. To experience the world as Arthropleura did is to slow down, to focus on the small details of the forest floor, and to appreciate the landscape from the ground up. It is an invitation to a more patient, more intimate, and more grounded way of seeing. It reminds us that for every grand, soaring perspective there is another, equally valid one, found in the quiet, shadowed world of the undergrowth. This was Arthropleura's kingdom, a vast horizontal world of immense detail, experienced one slow, deliberate step at a time. Just as the delicate wings of the griffinfly were preserved as impressions in stone, the passage of the gentle giant Arthropleura was also recorded, not by its body, but by its feet. Some of the most remarkable and evocative fossils from the Carboniferous period are not of the creatures themselves, but of the tracks they left behind in the soft mud of the swamps. These fossilized trackways are known to paleontologists as diplycnites. Imagine a vast muddy flat at the edge of a coal swamp 300 million years ago. An 8-foot-long Arthropleura makes its slow, steady way across this surface. With each wave of its hundreds of legs, it leaves a pattern of tiny footprints in the mud. The result is not a single line of tracks, but 2 long, parallel trails, one for the legs on the right side of its body, and one for the legs on the left. The trackway looks like a miniature railroad, 2 perfectly spaced lines of tiny dashes marching across the ancient surface. Now, imagine that this muddy flat is soon after covered by a gentle wash of sand or silt from a nearby river. This new layer protects the delicate footprints from being erased. Over millions of years, this entire landscape is buried, compressed, and turned to stone. The mud becomes mudstone, and the sand becomes sandstone. Today, when geologists split these layers of rock, they can reveal that ancient surface, perfectly preserved, and on it they find the unmistakable parallel tracks of Arthropleura's long-forgotten journey. These fossil trackways are incredibly powerful. A fossil of a body tells us what a creature looked like, but a trackway is a record of a creature's life, of a moment of its behaviour. When we look at these long parallel trails, we are witnessing a moment of movement frozen in time. We can almost feel the slow, rhythmic glide of the giant millipede. We can measure the width of the tracks to estimate the size of the animal that made them. We can see where it turned, where it paused. It is the closest we can ever come to walking alongside one of these incredible creatures. These stony footprints are a tangible link to the living, breathing world of the past. They transform Arthropleura from an abstract concept, a collection of fossilized plates, into a real animal that moved through a real landscape. They're a profound reminder that the rocks beneath our feet are not just inert stone, but are pages from a vast and ancient storybook. And sometimes, on those pages, we can find the footprints of the giants who walked there long before us. While the giant arthropods commanded the sky and the forest floor, a new and important story was unfolding in the transitional zone between water and land. Here, in the shallow, murky waters of the swamps and along their damp, muddy edges, lived the largest vertebrates of the Carboniferous world. the early amphibians. These creatures were pioneers. Their distant ancestors had been the first vertebrates to crawl out of the water, and by this period they had become well established as the dominant large animals in the swampy ecosystems. However, they were still fundamentally tied to the water. The word amphibian itself means two lives, and these creatures truly lived a dual existence. They could walk on land, breathing air with their simple lungs, but they were not yet true land dwellers. Their skin was not waterproof and needed to stay moist to aid in respiration. If they ventured too far from the water for too long, they would risk drying out, and most importantly, they needed the water to reproduce. They laid soft, jelly-like eggs, similar to modern frogs and salamanders, which had no protective shell. These eggs had to be deposited in the water, where they would be safe from desiccation. From these eggs would hatch not miniature adults, but aquatic larvae, or tadpoles, which breathed through gills and lived entirely underwater, just like the nymphs of the dragonflies. Only after a period of growth and metamorphosis would they develop lungs and legs and be able to venture onto the land. So, the world of the early amphibians was the shoreline. It was the place where the two worlds met. They were creatures of the threshold, with 1 foot in the aquatic past and 1 foot on the terrestrial future. The swamps and rivers were their nurseries, their larders, and their refuge. They would spend much of their time in the shallow water, lurking among the submerged roots of the giant trees, waiting for fish or other small aquatic prey to swim by. They would also come onto the land, perhaps to bask in the warm, humid air, or to hunt for the insects and other arthropods that scurried through the damp leaf litter. Their world was a semi-aquatic one, a landscape of endless, gentle transitions between wet and dry. This dependence on the water meant they were perfectly suited to the world of the Carboniferous, with its vast, planet-spanning network of swamps and wetlands. It was a golden age for amphibians, a time when they could spread and diversify, facing little competition from other large vertebrates. They were the quiet, slow-moving lords of the water's edge, the first chapter in the long and complex story of vertebrate life on land. What did these early amphibians actually look like? While there was a great diversity of forms, many of the larger and more common ones belonged to a group called the labyrinthodonts. The name sounds complex, but it comes from a very specific feature: the intricate maze-like or labyrinthine folding of the enamel on the surface of their teeth. To our eyes, a typical large labyrinthodont, like the well-known Eriops, would have looked something like a cross between a crocodile and a giant salamander. They had long, robust bodies, powerful tails that were flattened from side to side for swimming, and 4 short, stocky legs splayed out from the sides of their bodies. Their skulls were often large, broad, and flattened, with a wide mouth full of numerous sharp, conical teeth. Their eyes were typically positioned on the top of their heads, allowing them to peer above the surface of the water while keeping the rest of their body submerged, much like a modern crocodile or alligator. Their skin was not scaly like a reptile's, but was likely smooth and moist, possibly with embedded bony plates called scutes for added protection. They were not fast or agile creatures on land. Their splayed-out limb posture meant they would have walked with a sprawling, waddling gait, a slow and deliberate movement. They were built for power, not for speed. In the water, however, they would have been much more at home, using their powerful tails to propel themselves with surprising grace and force. Sizes varied greatly. Some were small, salamander-like creatures just a few inches long, but others, like Eriops, were true giants for their time, reaching lengths of 6 to 10 feet. They were the top predators of the aquatic and semi-aquatic environments. They would have hunted fish, smaller amphibians, and any large insects or arthropods that ventured too close to the water's edge. While they may seem primitive or clumsy to us, they were perfectly adapted to their world. They were tough, resilient pioneers, the first vertebrates to carve out a life on the challenging frontier of the land. Their solid, heavy-boned skeletons and powerful builds were a testament to their success. When we picture the Carboniferous swamp, we must not only see the giant insects and the alien trees, we must also imagine these large, slow-moving, salamander-like forms lurking silently in the murky water or resting peacefully on a muddy bank. They were the quiet, watchful presence in this world, the first vertebrate giants to walk the earth. As we've explored, the Carboniferous forest was a place of profound silence, a world without the familiar sounds of birds or mammals, but it was not entirely without voice. The amphibians we have just met were likely the first vertebrates to break that silence, to add their own voices to the soundscape of the ancient world. How do we know this? The fossilised skulls of these early amphibians show that they had well-developed ear structures, including a bone called the stapes that is used to transmit vibrations, sound, from the eardrum to the inner ear. This tells us that they could hear sounds travelling through the air, not just vibrations in the water or ground. And if they could hear, it is very likely that they also made sounds of their own. While we can never know for certain what they sounded like, we can make some gentle speculations based on their modern relatives, the frogs and salamanders. They would not have produced complex melodic songs like a bird. Their vocalizations would have been much simpler, more primal. They likely produced sound by forcing air from their lungs over vocal cords in their throats, just as we do. We can imagine that on a warm, humid Carboniferous evening, as the hazy sun set over the coal swamps, a new kind of chorus would begin. It would be a chorus of low, guttural sounds, deep, resonant croaks perhaps, or bellowing calls echoing across the still water. These sounds would have served several purposes. Males might have called to attract mates, their individual voices advertising their fitness and location. They might have used calls to establish territories, a low growl or grunt to warn off a rival, and they may have had simple alarm calls, a sudden splash and a croak to signal the presence of danger. This new chorus of amphibian voices would have added a new layer of life to the soundscape. The ancient silence was now punctuated by the first vertebrate calls, the first intentional communication using sound on land. It was a sign that the animal world was becoming more complex, that behaviour was becoming more sophisticated. So let us imagine ourselves sitting by the water's edge as dusk falls. The only light comes from the moon and stars filtered through the strange canopy. The air is still and warm, and out of the darkness comes a deep, lonely croak, answered by another from across the water. It is a simple sound, a primal sound, but it is the beginning of the world of animal voices, the first notes in a symphony that would grow to include all the sounds of the natural world we know today. The pace of life for the large amphibians, and indeed for most of the creatures in the Carboniferous world, was likely much slower than our own. It was a world of patient, deliberate movement, a world without the frantic, high-speed chases we might see on the African savanna or the rapid, darting motions of birds in our gardens. The primary reason for this slower pace was the biology of the amphibians themselves. As amphibians, they were cold-blooded, or more accurately ectothermic. This means that they could not generate their own body heat. Their body temperature was determined by the temperature of their surroundings. They relied on the warmth of the air and water to keep their bodies at a functional temperature. While the Carboniferous was a warm and stable greenhouse world, which was a great advantage for them, they still lacked the internal furnace of a warm-blooded animal. This meant their overall metabolism was slower. They could not sustain long periods of intense activity. They were masters of the ambush, capable of a sudden, powerful burst of energy to catch a fish or snap at an insect. But they could not engage in a prolonged chase. Their life was a cycle of waiting, resting, and conserving energy, punctuated by these brief moments of action. Their physical structure also contributed to this slow pace. As we've seen, their legs were splayed out to the sides of their bodies, not positioned directly underneath them like a mammal's. This sprawling stance is less efficient for walking and running. It requires more energy to lift the body off the ground with each step. Their movement on land would have been a deliberate lumbering waddle, a side-to-side motion of the body. This world, filled with these slow, deliberate creatures, would have felt incredibly serene and patient. There was no hurry, the climate was stable, the food was abundant. The primary strategy for survival was not speed, but stealth and power. It was about waiting for the right moment, and then acting with decisive force. This slower pace of life is a beautiful thing to contemplate. It invites us to leave behind our own hurried world and enter a state of greater calm and patience. It reminds us that there are other rhythms to life, other ways of being. The Carboniferous was a world that moved to the slow, steady beat of a cold-blooded heart, a world of immense tranquility, where time itself seemed to stretch out long and unbroken. As we watch these slow, water-bound amphibians, it is tempting to see them as a kind of evolutionary dead end, a group of creatures perfectly adapted to the swamps but unable to move beyond them. But this would be a profound misunderstanding of their importance. For hidden within this diverse group of early amphibians was the seed of an incredible future. They were not an end, but a vital beginning. Among the various labyrinthodonts and their relatives, one particular group was beginning to develop a set of traits that would change the course of life on Earth forever. These were the creatures that would eventually give rise to the amniotes, the group that includes all reptiles, birds and mammals, including ourselves. They were our own deepest, most ancient ancestors in the vertebrate line. What set these particular amphibians apart? The changes were small at first. Subtle shifts in the bones of the skull, the structure of the hip, and the way the limbs attached to the body. But the most crucial innovation was one we can never see in the fossil record: the evolution of the amniotic egg. This was the true key that would unlock the land. The amniotic egg was a revolutionary piece of biological technology. It was, in essence, a private pond. It enclosed the developing embryo in a series of protective membranes and a pool of fluid, and then wrapped the entire structure in a tough, leathery or hard shell. This shell was porous enough to let oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, but it was waterproof. For the first time, a vertebrate could lay its eggs on dry land without them drying out. The fragile, jelly-like amphibian egg had to be laid in the water. The amniotic egg had its own water supply. This single, brilliant invention freed the vertebrates from their dependence on the swamp. They could now venture away from the water's edge, deep into the drier interiors of the great continent of Pangaea. This new kind of creature, the first true reptile, could live its entire life on land. They likely still looked very much like their amphibian cousins, small, lizard-like animals scuttling in the undergrowth of the coal swamps. They would have been a minor part of the ecosystem, living in the shadow of the giant amphibians and arthropods. But they possessed a promise that their amphibian relatives did not. They carried the future. So as we observe the great lumbering Areops, the dominant predator of the swamp, let us remember that its true significance lies not just in what it was, but in what it would lead to. These first land dwellers, these pioneers of the water's edge, were the great-great-great-grandparents of the dinosaurs, of the eagles, and of humanity. They were the humble, water-bound vessels of an immense and wonderful potential, carrying the unwritten story of the next 300 million years of life within their slow, cold-blooded hearts. As we continue our exploration of the Carboniferous undergrowth, we encounter a creature that is, to many in our modern world, a symbol of unwelcome intrusion, the cockroach. But here, in this ancient forest, we must set aside our modern prejudices and see this creature for what it truly was, a resilient, successful, and essential member of the ecosystem. And like so many other arthropods of this time, it grew to an impressive size. The giant cockroaches of the Carboniferous, such as those of the genus Apthoroblatina, were not quite on the scale of Arthropleura, but they were formidable nonetheless. Some species could reach lengths of 3 to 4 inches, making them among the largest insects on the forest floor. To our eyes, they would have been instantly recognizable as cockroaches. They had the same flattened, oval-shaped body, the long, twitching antennae, and the fast, scurrying legs. Their design was a masterpiece of simplicity and durability, a blueprint for survival so successful that it has carried them, virtually unchanged, through 300 million years of planetary change, including several mass extinctions. They are true living fossils, and their story begins here, in the damp warmth of the coal swamps. Like their modern descendants, these ancient cockroaches were generalists. They were not picky eaters. They were part of the forest clean-up crew, scuttling through the leaf litter under fallen logs and over the giant roots of the scale trees, consuming almost any organic matter they could find. They ate decaying plant material, fungi, spores, and perhaps the eggs of other creatures or the carcasses of the dead. Their role, much like that of the giant millipede Arthropleura, was to be a recycler. They helped to break down the immense amount of organic debris that littered the forest floor, returning nutrients to the system. They were the tireless, humble janitors of this ancient world, and their abundance tells us that the ecosystem was healthy and thriving. Unlike modern cockroaches, these ancient forms had a prominent spike-like appendage at the end of their abdomen. This was an ovipositor, a tube-like organ used by the females to lay their eggs. They would have used this to inject their eggs into safe, damp places like rotting wood or soft soil, giving their offspring the best possible start in life. To see one of these giant cockroaches would be to see a piece of deep history in motion. It is a reminder that survival is not always about size or power, but about adaptability and resilience. These humble, scurrying creatures were, in their own way, as successful and as important as the magnificent griffinfly in the sky or the great amphibian in the water. They were the quiet, enduring foundation of the forest floor ecosystem. While many of the giants of the Carboniferous were peaceful herbivores or detritivores, the forest floor was also home to some formidable predators. Among the most impressive was a creature called Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis, which translates to breathing scorpion. This was a true scorpion, but of a size that dwarfs any of its modern relatives. Fossil evidence suggests that it could reach a length of over 2 feet, making it a terrifying and beautiful creature of the undergrowth. Its body plan was identical to the scorpions we know today. It had a tough armoured exoskeleton, a pair of large pincers, or pedipalps, at the front, 4 pairs of walking legs, and a long segmented tail held high over its back, tipped with a venomous stinger. It was a perfectly designed predator, a living weapon. The name breathing scorpion is significant because it possessed book lungs, a respiratory organ that is clear evidence of a terrestrial air-breathing lifestyle. This was not an aquatic sea scorpion, but a true land dweller that stalked the damp leaf litter of the coal swamps. In the dim light of the forest floor, Pulmonoscorpius would have been a patient hunter. It likely did not actively chase down its prey. Instead, it would have practiced the art of the ambush, hiding beneath a large fern frond or in a crevice in a fallen log, remaining perfectly still for long periods. Its vision was likely poor, so it would have relied on vibrations in the ground and air currents detected by fine sensory hairs on its body to sense the approach of its victims. Its prey would have been other large arthropods, perhaps the giant cockroaches or other insects, and possibly even the smaller amphibians and early reptiles that lived in the swamp. When a potential meal came within range, it would have struck with incredible speed, grabbing the victim with its powerful pincers. The stinger on its tail would have been used to quickly subdue the struggling prey with a potent injection of venom. The thought of a 2-foot-long scorpion can be unsettling, but let us try to see it not as a monster, but as another exquisite product of this unique environment. Its large size was made possible by the same high oxygen atmosphere that allowed the griffinfly to grow its giant wings. It was a beautiful, complex creature, an armoured jewel of the undergrowth, playing its necessary role as a predator to maintain the balance of the ecosystem. It was a solitary, silent hunter, a symbol of the efficient and sometimes deadly beauty of the Carboniferous world. The magnificent griffinflies were the undisputed kings of the sky, but they were not the only insects in the air. The Carboniferous period witnessed a great diversification of flying insects, including the appearance of a crucial evolutionary innovation, the ability to fold their wings. The griffinflies belong to an ancient group of insects called the Paleoptera, or old wings. A key characteristic of this group is that they cannot fold their wings back over their abdomens when they are at rest. Like modern dragonflies and mayflies, their wings are held out stiffly to the sides or straight up. This may seem like a small detail, but it has a huge impact on an insect's lifestyle. An insect that cannot fold its wings is very conspicuous and has difficulty hiding. It is limited to perching on open surfaces. During the Carboniferous, a new group of insects emerged, the Neoptera, or new wings. These insects had evolved a complex mechanism of muscles and sclerites, small, hard plates, at the base of their wings that allowed them to pivot and fold them, flat over their backs when they were not flying. This was a revolutionary development. Suddenly, insects could disappear. They could crawl into tight spaces, underneath bark, into cracks in rocks, deep within the leaf litter. It opened up a whole new world of ecological niches. It provided a way to hide from predators, like the giant dragonflies, and a way to protect their delicate wings from damage. This simple ability to fold their wings was a key reason for the incredible success and diversification of the Neopteran insects, a group that today includes over 99% of all insect species, from beetles and butterflies to ants and bees. In the Carboniferous, we see the very first members of these new-winged groups. They were the ancestors of modern grasshoppers and crickets, and the giant cockroaches we have already met were also part of this innovative lineage. While the giant dragonflies were perhaps more spectacular, the emergence of these smaller, more versatile insects with their folding wings was arguably a more significant long-term event. We are witnessing the birth of the modern insect world, so as we gaze into the sky, we must see not only the soaring dragonfly, but also the smaller, more nimble flyers zipping through the undergrowth, landing on a fern, and then, with a simple, revolutionary motion, folding their wings and vanishing into the green tapestry of the forest. As we meet these various inhabitants of the Carboniferous world, the giant flyers, the colossal millipedes, the armoured scorpions, and the pioneering amphibians, it is important to remember that none of them existed in isolation. They were all interconnected, threads in a complex and stable web of life. Let us take a moment to trace some of these connections. At the very base of this web were the great plants of the coal swamp forests. The giant club, mosses, horsetails and ferns were the primary producers. They were the ones capturing the energy of the sun and, with the help of the carbon-rich atmosphere, turning it into the organic matter that fueled the entire ecosystem. They were the foundation upon which everything else was built. Feeding on this incredible abundance of plant life were the primary consumers. This included the gentle giant Arthropleura, peacefully munching on the decaying plant litter on the forest floor, and countless other smaller millipedes, insects, and other arthropods. They were the ones transforming the raw material of the plants into the energy that could be passed up the food chain. Then there were the predators, the ones who fed on the plant eaters. In the sky, the dragonfly Meganura was a top predator, snatching smaller flying insects out of the air. On the forest floor, the giant scorpion Pulmonoscorpius and other predatory arthropods hunted the cockroaches and other crawlers. In the water and at its edge, the large amphibians like Eriops were the apex predators, feeding on fish and any land creature that strayed too close. And we cannot forget the decomposers, the cleanup crew. The giant cockroaches, Arthropleura, and a world of unseen microbes were constantly at work, breaking down the dead and returning their nutrients to the swamp, ensuring that the cycle of life could continue. Every creature had its role, its place in this intricate system. The size of the dragonfly was dependent on the high oxygen produced by the plants. The survival of the amphibians was dependent on the abundance of fish and insects. The health of the entire forest was dependent on the quiet work of the decomposers. It was a world in a state of beautiful dynamic balance, powered by the unique chemistry of the air and the endless humid summer. This web of life was robust and stable, enduring for millions of years, a testament to the resilience and interconnectedness of nature. As we complete our survey of the inhabitants of this lost world, it is essential to approach our understanding with a sense of humility and wonder. The picture we have painted, as detailed as it may seem, is inevitably incomplete. The fossil record, the only book from which we can read this ancient story, is like a magnificent library in which most of the books have been lost, and the surviving volumes have pages missing. The process of fossilization is an exceptionally rare event. For every single creature that died and was miraculously preserved in stone, countless millions lived and died without leaving a trace. The specific conditions required, rapid burial in fine sediment, an absence of oxygen to prevent decay, were common in the coal swamps, which is why we have such a rich record from this time. But even so, what we see is just a glimpse, a snapshot. There were almost certainly other, perhaps even more wondrous giant forms that we have not yet discovered, and may never discover. Were there other types of giant flying insects, perhaps with different wing shapes and behaviours? Were there other colossal arthropods crawling on the forest floor with forms we can barely imagine? Almost certainly. The fossils we have are just the representatives of a much richer and more diverse ecosystem. We must also remember that the fossil record is biased. It is much better at preserving creatures with hard parts, exoskeletons, bones, teeth, than it is at preserving soft-bodied creatures. The world of the Carboniferous was likely teeming with soft-bodied worms, slug-like creatures, and other invertebrates that have left no record of their existence. They were a vital but invisible part of the ecosystem, so we can think of our knowledge of the Carboniferous as a beautiful incomplete puzzle. The pieces we have, the griffinfly wing, the Arthropleura trackway, the amphibian skull, are stunning and precious. They allow us to assemble a picture of this world, but we must always be aware of the empty spaces between them. These missing pieces should not be a source of frustration, but a source of wonder. They leave room for our imagination to gently roam. They remind us that the past is always larger, stranger, and more complex than we can ever fully know. They keep the story of life on Earth fresh and full of mystery. As we continue our journey, let's hold this thought in our minds, that for all the marvels we have seen, they are but a fraction of the full and glorious truth of this forgotten age. The silence of the coal swamp holds secrets that we are still only beginning to uncover. Our journey so far has focused on the great coal swamps, the terrestrial heart of the Carboniferous world. These swamps were often bordered by another, equally vibrant ecosystem, the vast, shallow inland seas. Because there were no significant polar ice caps for much of this period, global sea levels were much higher than they are today. This high water flooded large areas of the low-lying continental interiors, creating warm, clear, and placid seas that teemed with life. These were not deep, forbidding oceans, but rather expansive, sunlit marine environments. Let us imagine ourselves floating now in these calm, tropical waters. The temperature is balmy, like a perfect summer's day. The sunlight penetrates deep into the clear water, illuminating a world that is just as rich and complex as the swamp forests we have left behind. These seas were the domain of creatures that had either never left the water or whose ancestors had returned to it. While the land was being colonized by the first great forests and giant insects, the oceans were continuing their own long, uninterrupted story of evolution. The life here was profoundly different from what we have seen on the land. It was a world of shells, of tentacles, of strange armoured fish, and of beautiful plant-like animals that filtered their food from the gentle currents. These shallow seas were incredibly productive. The warm water and abundant sunlight fueled vast populations of plankton, the microscopic organisms that form the base of the marine food web. This provided a rich source of food for a huge variety of filter-feeding animals that populated the sea floor. The chemistry of these seas was also different. The high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere made the seawater slightly more acidic, but it also provided an abundance of dissolved carbonates, which made it easy for organisms to build shells and skeletons out of calcium carbonate. This led to the formation of massive limestone reefs, built not by corals as in our modern oceans, but by other, more ancient organisms. These inland seas were a critical part of the global Carboniferous system. They influenced the climate by absorbing and distributing the sun's heat, and their biological activity played a role in the great carbon cycle that was shaping the planet's atmosphere. They were the tranquil blue heart of this greenhouse world, a world of life just as strange and wonderful as the one on the shore. As we drift down through the warm, sunlit water of the inland sea, the seafloor comes into view, and it is covered by a scene of breathtaking beauty. We find ourselves floating over a vast, dense meadow, a submerged garden that sways gently in the slow ocean currents. But these are not plants. They are animals known as crinoids, and the Carboniferous was their golden age. Crinoids are relatives of starfish and sea urchins, but their body plan is unique. A typical crinoid consists of a long, flexible stalk made of a series of disc-like plates stacked on top of one another, like a vertebral column. This stalk is anchored to the sea floor. At the top of the stalk is a cup-like structure called a calyx, which houses the animal's digestive and reproductive organs. And from this calyx sprouts a beautiful, feather-like crown of arms. These arms, covered in tiny sticky tube feet, are the crinoid's feeding apparatus. It holds them up in the water, a delicate living net to catch tiny particles of food. plankton and other organic debris that drift by on the currents. Because of their appearance, crinoids are often called sea lilies, and that is exactly what these vast assemblages look like. A meadow of strange, stony flowers gently dancing in the water. The seafloor of the Carboniferous shallow seas was often dominated by these creatures. They formed immense, dense thickets, known as crinoid meadows, that could stretch for miles. They came in a huge variety of shapes and sizes, with different stalk lengths and wonderfully complex branching arms. Their colours were likely as vibrant as any modern coral reef: pinks, reds, oranges and whites, creating a stunning underwater tapestry. These crinoid meadows were not just beautiful, they were entire ecosystems in themselves. Their dense stalks and feathery crowns provided a complex three-dimensional habitat for a host of other creatures. Small fish, trilobites, and other invertebrates would have found shelter and food among the crinoid stalks, just as animals in a forest find homes among the trees. When these crinoids died, their stony skeletons, made of thousands of tiny calcium carbonate plates, would fall to the sea floor. Over millions of years, these accumulated remains would be compressed and cemented together to form thick layers of rock, a type of limestone that is often composed almost entirely of fossilized crinoid fragments. They were not just inhabitants of the sea, they were the architects of future landscapes, the patient builders of the very rock of the planet. Gliding gracefully through the stone lily meadows were the predators of the Carboniferous seas. The oceans of this time were home to a fascinating and sometimes bizarre assortment of fish, including some of the earliest ancestors of modern sharks, and a host of strange, armoured, bony fish. The sharks of this era were very different from the great whites or tiger sharks of our own time. This was a period of great evolutionary experimentation for the shark lineage. One of the most common and strangest was a shark called Stethocanthus. It was relatively small, perhaps 2 to 3 feet long, but the males possessed a truly bizarre dorsal fin. It was shaped like a flat, brush-topped anvil and was covered in tiny, tooth-like scales called denticles. A similar patch of denticles was also found on the top of its head. The purpose of this strange structure is still a mystery. It may have been used in mating rituals to impress females, or perhaps to help a male attach to a female during courtship. Whatever its function, it is a wonderful example of the strange and beautiful forms that life was exploring. Another group of formidable predators were the early bony fish. Unlike the cartilaginous sharks, these fish had true, hard, bony skeletons. One of the most impressive was the Rhizodus, a giant freshwater predator that likely lived in the rivers and estuaries connected to the coal swamps. This creature was a true river monster, reaching lengths of over 20 feet. It had a massive head filled with huge tusk-like teeth, some of which could be several inches long. It was likely an ambush predator, lurking in the murky water and using its immense power to prey on the large amphibians that lived at the water's edge. The seas were also home to a great variety of smaller fish, which would have formed large schools, their scales shimmering in the filtered sunlight as they moved through the crinoid meadows. These fish were the crucial middle link in the marine food web, feeding on smaller invertebrates and plankton, and in turn becoming the food for the larger sharks and predatory fish. The oceans and waterways of the Carboniferous were a dynamic and dangerous place, a world of ancient experimental forms of hunters and prey, playing out their own drama of survival beneath the waves, far from the silent green world of the giant insects. While the fish and sharks were the active swimmers of the seas, the seafloor itself was home to a quieter, more patient community of animals, many of whom lived their lives encased in protective shells. The warm, carbonate-rich waters of the Carboniferous were an ideal environment for building these intricate, stony homes. Among the most abundant of these creatures were the brachiopods. To a casual observer, a brachiopod might look like a clam or an oyster, as it has 2 shells or valves that enclose its soft body. However, they are not related to mollusks. Their internal anatomy is very different, and their 2 shells are typically symmetrical with each other, but the top and bottom valves are different shapes. Unlike a clam, they were filter feeders, attaching themselves to the seafloor with a fleshy stalk and opening their shells slightly to draw in water and strain out food particles. The the Carboniferous seafloor would have been carpeted with vast colonies of these quiet, unassuming creatures. Another important group making its mark were the ammonites. These were relatives of modern squid and octopuses, but they lived inside a beautiful, coiled, chambered shell. The animal itself only lived in the outermost chamber. As it grew, it would build a new, larger chamber and seal off the old one, which it would then use as a flotation device, filling it with gas to control its buoyancy. These early ammonites were just beginning their long and successful reign in the oceans, a reign that would last until the end of the age of dinosaurs. And of course, there were the trilobites, the iconic armoured arthropods of the ancient seas. By the Carboniferous, the trilobites were in the twilight of their long existence. They had dominated the oceans for hundreds of millions of years, but their numbers were now dwindling. Still, some species persisted, scuttling across the seafloor, feeding on organic debris. When all of these shelled creatures died, their hard, mineralized shells would sink into the soft sediment. Just like the skeletons of the crinoids, these shells would accumulate in their billions, layer upon layer, eventually becoming the limestone and shale that we find today. The seafloor of the Carboniferous was a great repository of life's stony architecture, a slow and patient construction project that was preserving the memory of this tranquil, shallow water world. The world of the sunlit seas and the world of the dark, swampy forests were not separate. They were deeply and intimately connected, each influencing the other in a constant, gentle exchange. The most direct connection, as we've already discovered, was through the life cycles of many of the land-dwelling creatures. The magnificent griffinfly, the ruler of the sky, began its life as a nymph in the swampy waters. The giant amphibians, the largest vertebrates on land, had to return to the water to lay their eggs, and their young had to grow up in the aquatic environment. The land was constantly being populated by creatures that emerged from the water. The health and productivity of the swamps, rivers and shallow seas were therefore essential for the health of the terrestrial ecosystem. The water was the nursery for the giants of the land and air. There was also a flow of nutrients from the land to the water. The great rivers that snake their way through the coal swamps would have carried a heavy load of organic material, dissolved carbon, leaf fragments, spores, out into the inland seas. This runoff from the incredibly productive forests would have acted as a fertilizer for the marine ecosystem, providing the nutrients needed to support the vast plankton blooms that fed the crinoids and the brachiopods. The land was feeding the sea. At the same time, the vast expanse of the warm, shallow seas had a profound effect on the climate of the land. They acted as a giant heat reservoir, absorbing the sun's energy and releasing it slowly, which helped to moderate the global climate and keep it stable and warm. The high rates of evaporation from these seas also supplied the immense amounts of moisture that fell as rain on the coal swamps, keeping them perpetually wet and humid. The land and the sea were partners in a delicate dance. They were two parts of a single, interconnected system. The water provided the cradle for life and the moisture for the forests, while the forests provided the nutrients that fueled the life in the water. To understand the world of the giant insects, we must also understand the world of the sea lilies and the ancient sharks. It was all one world, one system, breathing and living in a beautiful, temporary balance that characterized this unique and tranquil period in our planet's long history. No golden age lasts forever. The very conditions that made the Carboniferous world so unique and so perfect for its giant inhabitants were, by their very nature, unsustainable. The long, slow twilight of this era began not with a sudden catastrophe, but with a quiet, gradual change in the very air itself. The great coal swamp forests were, in a way, too successful. For tens of millions of years, they had been engaged in a massive project of pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and burying it underground as coal. This process had two major consequences. The first, as we have explored in depth, was the dramatic rise in oxygen levels. But the second, which would ultimately bring the era to a close, was the steady depletion of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the planet's primary thermostat. It is the gas that creates the greenhouse effect, trapping the sun's warmth and keeping the planet hospitable. As the forests locked away more and more of this carbon, the Earth's atmospheric blanket began to thin. The planet was slowly, imperceptibly, losing its ability to hold onto its heat. Over millions of years, the global climate, which had been so stable and so warm, began to cool. This was not a sudden ice age, but a slow, creeping chill that began to spread from the poles. The eternal global summer was beginning to fade, giving way to a world with more pronounced seasons and greater temperature differences between the equator and the higher latitudes. This change in the air was the first domino to fall in a long, slow cascade of events that would transform the planet. The high oxygen levels also began to decline. As the climate cooled and dried, the great swamp forests began to shrink. With less plant life photosynthesizing, the rate of oxygen production slowed down. At the same time, new organisms like wood-eating fungi were becoming more efficient at decomposing dead plants, which meant that more carbon was being returned to the atmosphere through their respiration, using up oxygen in the process. The atmospheric imbalance that had defined the Carboniferous was slowly beginning to correct itself. The planet was breathing out again. For the giant insects and other arthropods whose very existence depended on the oxygen-rich air, this was a profound and existential threat. Their world was being dismantled, molecule by molecule. The air was becoming thinner, less nourishing, and less able to support their giant bodies. The long twilight had begun, not with a bang, but with a slow, silent change in the invisible, life-giving atmosphere. As the atmosphere lost its warming blanket of carbon dioxide and the global climate began to cool, a second major change began to unfold. The planet's water started to lock itself away as ice. For the first time in many tens of millions of years, massive ice sheets began to grow at the poles, particularly over the southern part of the great continent of Pangaea. This event is known as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, and it was a profound shift in the planet's climate state. As more and more water was pulled from the oceans to build these growing glaciers, sea levels around the world began to fall, and to fall dramatically. The vast, shallow inland seas that had flooded the continents for so long began to shrink. The warm, placid waters that had been home to the crinoid meadows and ancient sharks slowly retreated, exposing huge areas of former seafloor to the air. The coastlines of the world were redrawn. This retreat of the seas had a dramatic effect on the climate, particularly in the continental interiors. The moderating, moisture-giving influence of the seas was lost. The interiors of Pangaea, which had already been prone to dryness, became much more arid and seasonal. The gentle, humid world of the Carboniferous was being replaced by a harsher, more varied world of distinct seasons, with hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters. This drop in sea level also had a direct impact on the great coal swamps themselves. These swamps were low-lying coastal plains, and their existence depended on a high water table in the proximity of the sea. As the sea level fell, the water table in the coastal regions also dropped. The swamps began to drain and dry out. The rhythm of the planet was changing. The long, stable period of high sea levels and warm, wet conditions was giving way to a more dynamic and volatile world of fluctuating ice ages and changing coastlines. The world was becoming less hospitable to the very ecosystems that had defined the Age of Giants. The retreat of the seas was like the tide going out on a grand geological scale, leaving behind a world that was colder, drier, and far less friendly to the life that had thrived in the long summer of the Carboniferous. With the seas retreating and the climate cooling, the most dramatic and visible change occurred on the land itself. The great planet-spanning coal swamp forests, the very heart of the Carboniferous world, began to fragment and disappear. These forests were made up of plants like the giant club mosses and horsetails that were exquisitely adapted to the swampy, waterlogged conditions. They were water lovers. They needed the constant presence of moisture to grow and, most importantly, to reproduce. As the world became drier, these magnificent alien trees found themselves in a world to which they were no longer suited. Their habitats shrank, breaking up from a continuous green belt into smaller, isolated pockets of wetland. In their place, new kinds of plants began to thrive. These were the plants that were better adapted to the drier, more seasonal conditions. The most successful of these were the conifers, the ancestors of our modern pine and fir trees. Conifers had several key advantages in this new drier world. They had needles with waxy coatings to reduce water loss, deep root systems to find water far below the surface, and most importantly, they reproduced using seeds, often protected within a tough cone. The seed, which had been a quiet innovation in the undergrowth of the coal swamps, now became the key to success. Unlike the spores of the giant club mosses, seeds did not need water for fertilization. They could be dispersed by the wind into dry areas and wait for the right conditions to germinate. The landscape of the world began to change. The lush, green and monotonous world of the coal swamps was replaced by a more varied mosaic of tougher, more resilient woodlands. The age of the giant spore-bearing trees was over. The future belonged to the conifers and the seed ferns. This change in the dominant flora had a ripple effect through the entire ecosystem. The very nature of the food source for herbivores was changing. The fall of the great swamp forests meant the end of the massive continuous production of organic matter that had fueled the entire system and created the coal. The world was becoming a less productive, less lush place. For the creatures of the Carboniferous, their home, their entire world, was disappearing before their eyes, replaced by a new kind of landscape, a new kind of forest that was governed by a new set of rules. For the giant insects and arthropods, these cascading changes, the cooling climate, the drying land, and the shrinking forests, were all significant challenges. But the most direct and insurmountable problem was the change that had started it all, the thinning of the air. As the oxygen levels in the atmosphere began their slow decline from the dizzying heights of 35% back toward the 20 to 25% range, the biological loophole that had allowed for gigantism began to close. Let us return to our metaphor of the tiny straws, the tracheal tubes that insects use to breathe. In the high oxygen world, these straws could be long and still, deliver enough oxygen to the tissues of a giant body. But as the concentration of oxygen in the air decreased, the effective length of these straws shrank. The passive diffusion system of breathing became inefficient once again for large bodies. A griffin fly with a 2.5-foot wingspan simply could not get enough oxygen to power its enormous flight muscles in an atmosphere with 25% oxygen. An 8-foot Arthropleura could not deliver enough oxygen to the cells in the deep interior of its body. Their very size, which had been such an advantage in the Carboniferous, now became a fatal liability. This was not a sudden event. It was a slow, inexorable pressure applied over millions of years. Each generation of giant arthropods would have found the world a little harder to survive in. Perhaps they grew a little slower, reached a slightly smaller adult size, or had less energy for hunting and reproduction. Over thousands of generations, natural selection would have favoured the smaller individuals, the ones whose more modest bodies could be sustained by the thinning air. The giants did not die out in a single dramatic extinction. They simply, gradually shrank. The lineage of the griffinflies did not disappear. It evolved into the smaller, more familiar dragonflies of our own world. The lineage of Arthropleura did not vanish. It continued in the form of the much smaller millipedes and centipedes that still crawl on the forest floor today. This was not a failure, but a beautiful and necessary adaptation. Life was adjusting itself to the new realities of the planet. The window of opportunity for giant insects had closed, not because of a flaw in their design, but because the world itself had changed. The age of giants faded away, a casualty of the planet's own long, slow and inevitable breath. As one group of animals waned, another was perfectly positioned to rise. While the drying climate and changing landscape were a disaster for the water-dependent amphibians and the oxygen-hungry giant arthropods, they were a golden opportunity for the newest vertebrate pioneers, the early reptiles. The reptiles, born from their amphibian ancestors in the heart of the swamps, possessed the perfect toolkit for this new, drier world. Their greatest advantage was the amniotic egg. While the amphibians were forced to retreat with the shrinking wetlands, forever tied to the water to lay their soft eggs, the reptiles could march confidently into the newly expanding dry lands. They could lay their tough-shelled eggs far from any pond or river, opening up a whole new continent for colonization. Their second key advantage was their skin. Unlike the moist, permeable skin of amphibians, reptiles had developed dry, scaly skin that was far more resistant to water loss. This allowed them to be active for longer periods in dry air without the risk of dehydration. They were no longer prisoners of the swamp. And finally, their skeletons and muscles were, in general, becoming more efficient for life on land. Their legs were moving from the sprawling, splayed-out posture of the amphibians to a position more directly under the body, allowing for more efficient movement. In the new, drier forests of the emerging Permian period that followed the Carboniferous, the reptiles flourished. They diversified rapidly, evolving into a huge variety of forms. There were small, agile insect-eating reptiles, large, powerful, herbivorous reptiles, and the first great reptilian predators, the ancestors of creatures like Dimetrodon. The balance of power on the planet was shifting. The long reign of the amphibians as the dominant large land vertebrates was coming to an end. The age of arthropod giants was over. The future belonged to the reptiles. They were the heirs of the Carboniferous world, the creatures perfectly adapted to inherit the earth that the coal swamps had left behind. The long twilight of the Carboniferous was the dawn of the age of reptiles, a new and dramatic chapter in the story of life that would eventually lead to the dinosaurs. The most tangible and powerful legacy of the age of giant insects is not found in the sky or on the land, but deep beneath our feet. It is the immense planet-spanning deposits of coal that give the Carboniferous period its name. This black combustible rock is the concentrated ghost of the great swamp forests, the buried sunlight of a world that vanished 300 million years ago. Let us revisit those ancient swamps and watch the process unfold. For millions of years, the world was covered in these incredibly productive forests. The giant club mosses, horsetails and ferns grew at a furious pace in the warm, wet, carbon-rich environment. And as they died, they fell into the stagnant, oxygen-poor water of the swamps. In a modern forest, a fallen tree is quickly broken down by a host of decomposers, fungi, bacteria, insects, and its carbon is returned to the atmosphere. But in the Carboniferous swamps, this process was incredibly inefficient. The key wood-digesting microbes had not yet become widespread or effective, so the dead plant matter did not rot away. Instead, it just piled up, layer upon layer, forming a thick, spongy mat of partially decayed vegetation called peat. This process continued for millennia, creating peat deposits that were hundreds of feet thick. Then, the landscape would change. Sea levels might rise, or a river might change its course, and the peat swamp would be buried by a layer of sand or mud. This layer would seal the peat off from the air, protecting it from further decay. The great forest had, in essence, fallen asleep beneath a blanket of sediment. Over millions of years, as more and more layers of sediment piled on top, the pressure and the heat began to increase. This immense pressure squeezed the water out of the peat, and the gentle heat began a slow chemical transformation. The organic molecules of the ancient plants were rearranged, their oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen driven off, leaving behind a substance that was becoming more and more concentrated in the one element that remained, carbon. The peat slowly cooked and hardened, first turning into a low-grade brown coal called lignite, then into a harder, blacker, bituminous coal, and finally, under the greatest heat and pressure, into the hard, shiny anthracite. The forest was turning to stone. When we hold a piece of coal in our hands today, we are holding the physical remains of a lepidodendron or a giant fern. We are holding the product of ancient sunlight that fell upon leaves that no human eye has ever seen. The energy stored in that black rock is the solar energy that was captured by photosynthesis 300 million years ago. The story of the Industrial Revolution, the rise of our modern civilization, was powered by these sleeping forests. We learned to wake them up, to release their stored ancient sunlight by burning their carbonaceous remains. It is a profound and direct link between our world and the world of the giant insects, a legacy written in black stone deep within the earth. Beyond the vast legacy of coal, the Carboniferous world left us a more delicate and detailed inheritance. Its fossils. Each fossil is a small, miraculous window into this lost world, a single, preserved word from an ancient story. The process that turns a living creature into a fossil is a rare and beautiful accident of nature. It requires a fortunate series of events, a perfect alignment of circumstances. Let us imagine the death of a griffin fly. It falls into a calm, swampy pool. If it had fallen on dry land, it would have been eaten by scavengers or simply decayed into nothing. But here, in the oxygen-poor water, decay is slowed. Fine silt, washing in from a nearby river, gently covers its body. This rapid burial is crucial. It protects the delicate body from being broken apart by currents or disturbed by other creatures. As the seasons pass, more and more layers of sediment accumulate on top, burying the griffinfly deeper and deeper. The immense pressure of these overlying layers presses down, squeezing the water out of the sediment and turning it to rock. The soft parts of the insect's body decay away, but as they do, minerals in the surrounding groundwater slowly seep in and crystallize in their place, creating a perfect stony replica of the original form. Or perhaps all that is left is a thin film of carbon, a black silhouette of the creature's body, or as we have seen, simply the impression of its wings in the fine-grained stone. This is the magic of fossilization. It is a process of substitution, of replacement, of turning the ephemeral stuff of life into the eternal substance of rock. The coal swamps of the Carboniferous were a perfect place for this to happen. The abundance of calm, stagnant water and the constant deposition of fine sediments created ideal fossil-making factories. The result is that the Carboniferous period has left us an exceptionally rich and detailed library of fossils. We find not only the giant spectacular creatures, but also the delicate lacy fronds of ferns, the patterned bark of the scale trees, the tiny shells of marine creatures, and even the fossilized spores of the ancient plants. Each fossil is a pressed flower in the pages of a stone book. It is a tangible piece of the past, something we can hold in our hands. It is through these precious accidental relics that we're able to piece together the story of this world, to give names to its inhabitants, and to imagine their lives. They are our only guide, our only connection to the age of giants. A fossil in the ground is a silent, hidden secret. It takes a special kind of person to find it, to understand it, and to make it speak. These people are paleontologists, and they are the careful translators of the language of stone. Their work is a slow, patient, and often difficult art. It begins with geology. By studying the layers of rock or strata in a hillside or a quarry, a paleontologist can learn to read the history of the landscape. They can identify the layers that were deposited during the Carboniferous period, and they know that these are the rocks that might hold the fossils they seek. The search for fossils is often a matter of careful, methodical walking, of training the eye to spot the subtle hint of a fossil bone or the telltale shape of a leaf impression on a piece of shale. It is a treasure hunt that can last for years. When a significant fossil is found, the real work begins. It must be painstakingly excavated from the surrounding rock. This is not done with shovels and pickaxes, but with dental picks, fine brushes, and even needles. It is a delicate surgery on stone, designed to free the fossil without damaging it. A large fossil, like the skeleton of an amphibian, might take a team of people months or even years to fully excavate and prepare. Once the fossil is in the laboratory, the process of translation begins. The paleontologists must use their deep knowledge of anatomy and biology to identify what they have found. They compare it to other fossils, to living organisms, piecing together the puzzle of its identity. Was it a predator or herbivore? How did it move? What was its world like? They are detectives, gathering clues from the shape of a tooth, the curve of a bone, the pattern of veins on a wing. They use powerful microscopes to study the fine details of the fossil, and advanced imaging technologies like CT scans to peer inside the rock and see the structures hidden within. The work of a paleontologist is a beautiful blend of rugged fieldwork and delicate, precise science. They are the ones who give voice to the silent past. Every creature we have met on our journey tonight, Meganeura, Arthropleura, Eriops, is known to us because of the patient, dedicated work of these scientific storytellers. They are the ones who have opened the stone book of the Carboniferous and have learned to read the wondrous tales written within its pages. How can we possibly know what the air was like 300 million years ago? It seems like a detail that would be lost forever to the depths of time, yet through the cleverness of science we can listen for the faintest echoes of that ancient atmosphere. One of the most amazing clues comes from tiny fossilised bubbles of air trapped in ancient amber. Amber is fossilised tree resin. Occasionally, as this sticky resin flowed down the trunk of a carboniferous tree, it would trap a small bubble of the surrounding atmosphere. Over millions of years, the resin hardened into amber, and that tiny pocket of carboniferous air was preserved, a perfect microscopic time capsule. By carefully drilling into the amber in a vacuum and analysing the gas that is released, scientists can directly measure the composition of the air from the time the resin was fresh. These tiny bubbles have confirmed the high oxygen levels of the past. Another line of evidence comes from the study of geochemistry. Scientists can analyse the chemical composition of ancient rocks and soils. The way that certain elements, like carbon and sulphur, are processed and deposited in sediments is affected by the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. By studying the ratios of different isotopes, different forms of these elements, in carboniferous rock layers, geologists can build a model of how much oxygen was present in the air at that time. Even the prevalence of charcoal in the fossil record provides a clue. Fires burn much more readily and intensely in a high oxygen environment. The Carboniferous rock layers contain a great deal of fossilised charcoal, suggesting a world where wildfires were common and fierce, another indicator of an oxygen-rich atmosphere. By piecing together all of these different lines of evidence, the bubbles in amber, the chemistry of the rocks, the frequency of ancient fires, scientists can reconstruct the ancient atmosphere with a surprising degree of confidence. It is a remarkable feat of scientific detective work. It allows us to know not just what the world looked like, but what it felt like to breathe its air, a detail that brings this lost world to life in a vivid and powerful way. As our exploration of the legacy of the Carboniferous comes to a close, it is comforting to know that this ancient world is not entirely separate from our own. Its memory is not confined to dusty museum halls or obscure scientific journals. It is a physical and present part of our world, a sleeping kingdom that lies deep beneath our own familiar landscapes. In many parts of the world, from the Appalachian Mountains of North America to the coalfields of Britain, Germany and China, the story of the Carboniferous is written directly into the geology of the land. If you were to drill deep into the earth in these places, you would pass through layers of rock from different ages until you reached the layers that geologists call the coal measures. Here, you would find a repeating pattern in the rock, a cycle, that tells the story of the ancient swamps. You would find a layer of sandstone laid down by an ancient river. Above it, a layer of shale, the hardened mud from a quiet pool. And then you would find it, a thick black seam of coal, the compressed remains of the forest itself. And in the shale layers just above the coal, you will often find the most beautiful fossils, the delicate fronds of ferns, the bark of the scale trees, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, the wing of a giant insect. This repeating pattern tells the story of the rising and falling seas, of the swamps growing, flourishing, and then being buried, over and over again for millions of years. This world is a part of the very foundation of our own. The energy that powers our homes may have come from a forest that fell 300 million years ago. The gentle hills and valleys of the landscape we live in may have been shaped by the soft or hard nature of these ancient buried rock layers. The story of the Carboniferous is not just a story about the distant past. It is a story about the ground we stand on. It's a reminder that the Earth is unimaginably old, and that the history of our planet is a story of layers, of worlds built on top of the sleeping remains of the worlds that came before. The age of giant insects is not truly gone. It's just dreaming, deep beneath our feet. As our journey through the Carboniferous world begins to wind down, let us take a moment to reflect on what we have seen, not just with our eyes, but with our sense of scale. The first and most humbling scale we must confront is that of deep time. The number, 300 million years, is so vast that our minds can barely grasp its meaning. All of recorded human history, from the first cave paintings to the present moment, is just a tiny, paper-thin sliver at the very end of that immense timeline. If the entire history of the Earth were a single calendar year, the Carboniferous period would take up most of the month of November. All of human civilization would appear in the last few seconds, before midnight on December 31st. To contemplate this immensity is to feel a sense of profound humility. It gently reminds us that our own world, our own time, is not the only story. It is just one chapter, one brief and beautiful moment in a much longer and grander narrative. The world has been through countless transformations, has been home to forms of life so strange they challenge our imagination, and it will continue to change long after we're gone. Thinking about deep time can also be a source of great peace. It allows us to step outside the frantic, hurried pace of our own lives and to see our own worries and concerns from a much grander perspective. The Earth is patient. Its processes unfold over millions and billions of years. The silent, slow drift of continents, the gradual building of mountains, the patient work of evolution, these are the true rhythms of our planet. When we connect with this deep, slow pulse of geological time, it can be deeply calming. It reminds us that we are part of something ancient, vast and enduring. The age of giant insects was not a fleeting moment. It lasted for 60 million years, a span of time 30 times longer than the entire existence of the human species. It was a stable, enduring world, a long and successful chapter in the planet's history. To appreciate the scale of deep time is to appreciate the true majesty of the Earth's story. The second scale we must reflect upon is the scale of life itself. The Carboniferous world shows us that the forms and sizes we consider normal or natural are entirely dependent on the conditions of the planet. In our world, insects are small. It is a fundamental rule of our ecosystem, but the Carboniferous teaches us that this rule is not absolute. Change one key variable, the oxygen content of the atmosphere, and the rulebook is rewritten. Life, in its incredible creativity, will immediately explore the new possibilities that are offered. The 2.5-foot wingspan of a griffinfly is a stunning testament to this principle. It is a reminder that life is opportunistic and wonderfully adaptable. It will fill every available niche and will experiment with every possible form. The contrast between the giant Arthropleura and its tiny modern millipede relatives is a powerful lesson in how environmental conditions can shape the very scale of existence. The world we see around us is not the only way a world can be. There have been other worlds, other ecologies, governed by other rules, right here on this same planet. This reflection can inspire a deep sense of awe for the versatility of life. Life is not a static, fixed thing. It is a dynamic, flowing process of exploration and invention. The blueprints for life, written in the language of DNA, hold an almost infinite potential for different forms, different sizes, and different ways of being. The Carboniferous was a time when the planet's conditions allowed one particular set of those potentials, the potential for giant arthropods, to be expressed. It makes us wonder, what other incredible potentials does life hold? What other amazing forms might arise in the distant future under conditions we cannot yet imagine? To contemplate the scale of Carboniferous life is to expand our own sense of what is possible. It breaks us free from the assumption that the world as we know it is the only way it can be. It fills us with a sense of wonder at the boundless creativity of the natural world, a creativity that has been at work for billions of years and which is still unfolding all around us. Contemplating the vast scales of time and life in the Carboniferous world inevitably leads us to reflect on our own place in the Earth's long story. Standing in the imaginary presence of these ancient giants, we can feel our own smallness, our own brief moment on this planetary stage. And this feeling is not a negative one. It is a source of profound connection and perspective. We are accustomed to seeing ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the dominant species on the planet. But the story of the Carboniferous reminds us that dominance is temporary. For 60 million years, the giant insects and amphibians were the undisputed rulers of the land. Their world seemed as permanent and as stable to them as ours does to us. They were a successful and brilliant expression of life in their time. Their story teaches us that the Earth does not belong to any one species. We are merely its current custodians. We are one link in a very long chain, a chain that stretches back through the age of mammals, the age of dinosaurs, all the way back to those first amphibians crawling out of the Carboniferous swamps, and even further into the deep, dark ocean of early life. We are newcomers here, a very recent and very powerful arrival. This perspective can foster a sense of responsibility. If we understand that our time here is just one chapter, we may feel a greater urgency to be good stewards of the planet, to preserve the health and beauty of the world for the chapters that will come after us. It also connects us, in a very real way, to the creatures of the past. When we look at a dragonfly today, we can see in it the faint echo of its giant griffinfly ancestor. When we see a salamander, we can see a miniature version of the great labyrinthodonts. We are related to them all. The same fundamental processes of life that animated the Carboniferous world are at work in our own bodies. The carbon atoms that form our cells were once part of that ancient CO2-rich atmosphere. We are, in a literal sense, made of the same stuff as the star stuff, but also the same stuff as the swamp stuff. We are part of the Earth story, not separate from it. This is our place, to be the part of the story that can look back, that can wonder, that can learn, and that can appreciate the incredible journey that has brought us all here. The story of the Carboniferous is not just about the rise of giants, it is also about their fall, and in this it teaches us a powerful lesson about the resilience of life. The end of the Carboniferous period was a time of great change and upheaval. The climate cooled, the land dried, the forest collapsed, and the very air thinned. For the creatures that were perfectly adapted to the old world, it was a catastrophe. The age of giant insects and amphibians came to an end, but life itself did not end. It adapted. It transformed. It found new ways to thrive in the new world. This is perhaps the most hopeful and reassuring message from the deep past. Life has an incredible capacity to endure. It has survived asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, dramatic climate shifts, and ice ages. The end of one era is always, and without exception, the beginning of another. The decline of the giant arthropods and amphibians was not a tragedy in the grand scheme of things. It was a necessary transition. It was a passing of the torch. Their decline created the ecological space for the rise of the reptiles, which would go on to have their own magnificent reign. And the decline of the reptiles, in turn, would pave the way for the age of mammals, and eventually for us. The web of life is constantly being rewoven. When one thread is broken, others are strengthened. When one form of life fades, another emerges to take its place. The fundamental drive of life to persist, to reproduce, to adapt, is the most powerful force on our planet. So while we can feel a sense of gentle melancholy for the loss of the beautiful strange world of the Carboniferous, we can also feel a sense of profound optimism. The story of life on Earth is a story of unbroken continuity. It is a story of resilience in the face of immense challenges. The same life force that powered the great griffinfly is still at work today, in the smallest bacterium, in the largest whale, and in our own hearts. Life endures. This is the quiet, powerful promise whispered to us from the ancient stones. As our reflection on scale concludes, what are we left with? After the scientific explanations and the geological timelines, what is the feeling that remains? It is, above all, a feeling of quiet, peaceful wonder. The story of the Carboniferous world is a gift. It is a dream that our planet had long before we were here to witness it, a dream that has been preserved in fragments for us to rediscover. It is a story that has the power to transport us out of our ordinary reality and into a world that is at once deeply alien and deeply connected to our own. Let us hold, for a moment, the images that our journey has given us. The image of a forest of giant scaly trees, standing in silent ranks in the dim green light. The image of an 8-foot millipede, a gentle river of armour flowing silently through the ferns, its many legs moving in a hypnotic wave-like rhythm. The image of a giant griffinfly, its 2.5-foot wings like panes of stained glass, shimmering in the hazy sunlight as it soars over the endless swamp. These images are precious. They are mental touchstones that can reconnect us to the magic and mystery of our own planet. They remind us that the world is not just what we see on the surface. It is a place of deep history, of hidden stories, of lost wonders. This sense of wonder is a profoundly calming and enriching emotion. It does not demand answers or solutions. It simply asks us to be present, to be open, and to appreciate the beauty and strangeness of existence. It is the feeling a child has when looking at the stars for the first time. It is the feeling we get when we stand at the edge of the ocean and contemplate its vastness. The story of the age of giant insects is an invitation back to that state of simple, pure wonder. It is a reminder that the universe, and our own small planet within it, is far more creative, more bizarre, and more beautiful than we can ever fully comprehend. And in a world that can often feel mundane or overwhelming, that is a precious and deeply comforting thought. The wonder remains, waiting for us in the silent story of the rocks. We need only to be quiet enough to listen. Throughout our journey, we have been grounded in the great supercontinent of Pangaea. But it's important to remember that this vast landmass was not a static feature. It was itself a temporary arrangement in the long and patient dance of the continents. The force driving this dance is plate tectonics, the slow, inexorable movement of the great plates that make up the Earth's crust. Think of the Earth's surface not as a solid, single shell, but as a cracked eggshell with a dozen or so large pieces or plates that are constantly in motion. These plates are floating on the hotter, more fluid mantle beneath them. They are moving at a speed of only a few centimetres per year, about the same speed that your fingernails grow. It is a motion so slow as to be completely imperceptible to us. But over the vastness of geological time, this slow, steady drift can reshape the entire face of the planet. The great supercontinent of Pangaea was formed by the collision of earlier, smaller continents. And during the Carboniferous, this process of collision was still underway. The landmasses that would become North America and Europe were crashing into the landmass that would become Africa. A slow-motion collision that was pushing up a vast mountain range, the ancestral Appalachians, which in their prime would have rivaled the modern Himalayas. This constant, slow movement of the continents was a powerful, unseen force shaping the Carboniferous world. It determined the location of the shorelines and the inland seas. It created the mountains that influenced weather patterns. And eventually the continued shifting of the plates would be part of what brought the Carboniferous era to an end. As Pangaea continued to consolidate and drift, the vast tropical belt at the equator, where the coal swamps thrived, would have been altered. Some regions would have moved into drier, cooler latitudes. This patient dance of the continents is a beautiful and humbling concept. It reminds us that even the most solid and permanent features of our world, the very ground beneath our feet, are in a state of slow, perpetual transformation. It is a silent global process, a geological heartbeat that has been pulsing for billions of years, constantly creating and recreating the stage on which the drama of life unfolds. Another powerful unseen force that shaped this world was the planet's own breathing, the great global rhythm of the carbon cycle. Carbon is the fundamental building block of life on Earth. It is in the air as carbon dioxide, dissolved in the oceans, locked away in rocks, and is the essential element in every living thing. The carbon cycle is the continuous journey of these carbon atoms as they move between these different reservoirs. Let us use the metaphor of the Earth itself breathing. Photosynthesis, practiced by plants on land and plankton in the sea, is the Earth's great inhale. Life breathes in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and uses it to build its body. Respiration is the exhale. When organisms breathe or when they die and are decomposed, that carbon is returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. For most of Earth's history, this breath has been relatively balanced. The amount of carbon being inhaled by life is roughly equal to the amount being exhaled. But the Carboniferous period was a time of a great, deep and prolonged inhale. The evolution of vast forests with tough woody lignin created a huge new reservoir for carbon to be stored in, and because the microbes that could efficiently decompose this wood had not yet evolved, when these forests died, much of that carbon was not exhaled back into the atmosphere. It was buried. It was removed from the cycle, locked away deep in the Earth's crust as coal. The Earth took a deep breath, and it held that breath for 60 million years. This massive one-way movement of carbon from the atmosphere to the geosphere is what drove all the changes we have witnessed. It was this deep inhale that thinned the carbon dioxide blanket, causing the planet to cool. It was this deep inhale that led to the massive surplus of oxygen in the atmosphere, allowing the insects to grow to giant sizes. The Carboniferous world in its entirety can be understood as the consequence of this single, profound event in the planet's respiratory history. Eventually the breath would be exhaled, the evolution of more efficient decomposers, changes in geology, and eventually, many millions of years later, the burning of fossil fuels by humans would all return that buried carbon to the atmosphere. But for this long, special period, the planet was holding its breath, and in that quiet, sunlit, oxygen-rich pause, the world of giants was allowed to flourish. We have mentioned several times a crucial and fascinating detail about the Carboniferous world: the inefficiency of decomposition. This is a key part of the puzzle, and it brings our attention to a humble and often overlooked kingdom of life, the fungi. In our modern world, fungi are the master decomposers of wood. Along with certain bacteria, they are among the only organisms that can produce the specific enzymes needed to break down lignin, the incredibly tough and complex polymer that gives wood its strength and rigidity. When a tree falls in a modern forest, these fungi go to work, their thread-like hyphae penetrating the wood, slowly digesting the lignin and cellulose, and returning the carbon to the ecosystem. But for most of the Carboniferous period, it seems that these highly effective wood-decomposing fungi had not yet evolved, or were not yet widespread. The evolutionary toolkit to efficiently dismantle a tree was still being assembled. This created a profound bottleneck in the carbon cycle. The forests were producing wood at an incredible rate, but the planet's recycling system couldn't keep up. The result was that fallen trees, instead of rotting away, simply piled up, becoming the raw material for coal. This idea is sometimes called the lignin event hypothesis. It suggests that there was a long, multi-million-year gap between the evolution of widespread, dense forests of woody trees and the evolution of the microbes that could effectively decompose them. This gap was the window of opportunity for the great coal seams to form. It was a unique time when the planet's production of biomass far outpaced its ability to recycle it. Eventually, evolution caught up. By the end of the Carboniferous and the beginning of the next period, the Permian, new types of fungi known as white rot fungi, had evolved the enzymes needed to break down lignin. From this point on, the large-scale burial of wood that created the coal swamps became a much rarer event. The recycling system was back online. The story of these waiting fungi is a beautiful illustration of the interconnectedness of all life. The absence of a tiny unseen microbe can have planet-altering consequences, shaping the climate, the atmosphere, and the very course of evolution for millions of years. It is a quiet reminder that the most powerful forces are not always the largest or the most conspicuous. Amidst all this strangeness and transformation, a single continent, alien trees, giant insects, a different atmosphere, it is reassuring to remember that some things were exactly the same. The fundamental laws of physics, the rules that govern the universe, were unchanging. Gravity was the same force then as it is now. A falling scale tree would have crashed to the ground with the same acceleration. The dragonfly had to work against the same gravitational pull to lift itself into the sky. The properties of light were the same. The ancient sun shone with the same spectrum of light, and the process of photosynthesis used that light in the same way it does today. The light would have reflected and refracted, creating the same kinds of shadows and dappled light in the fern-choked undergrowth. The laws of chemistry were the same. The way that oxygen reacted with other molecules to release energy, the way carbon atoms linked together to form the complex chains of life, the way water acted as a universal solvent, all these fundamental processes were identical. This constancy of physical law is a comforting and grounding thought. It provides a bridge of understanding between our world and the world of the Carboniferous. While the biological and geological stage was utterly different, the underlying mechanics of reality were the same. This is what allows scientists to reconstruct this lost world. Because we know how gravity works, we can model the flight of a dragonfly. Because we know how chemistry works, we can understand the formation of coal and the composition of the atmosphere. The unchanging laws of physics are our Rosetta Stone, the key that allows us to translate the clues left behind in the rocks into a coherent and understandable story. It is a reminder that while the expressions of life on Earth are endlessly varied and creative, they all must play by the same fundamental set of rules. This deep, reliable constancy of the universe provides a firm foundation, a sense of order and peace beneath the ever-changing, beautiful chaos of life's long history. Our exploration of these unseen forces, plate tectonics, the carbon cycle, evolution, reveals a profound truth about our planet. The Earth is not just a collection of individual parts. It is a single, interconnected system. The geology, the atmosphere, the oceans, and life itself are all deeply intertwined, each constantly influencing and responding to the others in a delicate, dynamic balance. The Carboniferous Period is a perfect illustration of this principle. The dance of the continents created the geography of Pangaea. This geography influenced the ocean currents and the climate. The warm, wet climate allowed the evolution of the coal swamp forests. The forests, through their life processes, dramatically changed the atmosphere, and the new, oxygen-rich atmosphere, in turn, allowed for the evolution of new forms of life, the giant arthropods. It was a great planetary feedback loop, but the story also shows us that this balance is not static. It is constantly shifting and evolving. The very success of the forests, their removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, was what ultimately led to their own demise by cooling the planet and changing the climate. The system is always seeking equilibrium. When one component pushes the system out of balance, other forces will conspire to slowly, patiently bring it back. This view of the Earth as a single, complex and self-regulating system is one of the most important insights of modern science. It fosters a sense of reverence for the intricate and often invisible connections that sustain our world. It teaches us that any action in one part of the system will inevitably have consequences in others, sometimes in ways that are unexpected and delayed. The world of the giant insect was not a random accident. It was the beautiful and logical outcome of a specific state of the Earth system, a brief and wonderful moment of creative imbalance. By understanding these deep, unseen forces, we can appreciate the Carboniferous world not just as a collection of strange creatures, but as a holistic and elegant piece of our planet's long, interconnected story. Our long journey into the deep past is now coming to its gentle end. It is time to let the current of deep time carry us back, up through the silent, dark waters, toward the familiar sunlit surface of our own world. We can imagine the world of the Carboniferous as a beautiful, vivid dream we have been having. The images of the scale trees, the shimmering wings of the griffinfly, the slow glide of Arthropleura, they begin to soften at the edges, to fade just as a dream does upon waking. We drift up, away from the Carboniferous, and past the age of reptiles. We see the reign of the dinosaurs come and go, a great and dramatic chapter in Earth's story. We see the continents of Pangaea break apart, their slow dance carrying them to their present positions. We see the rise of the mammals, our own ancestors, diversifying in the wake of the dinosaurs' demise. We drift higher still, through the long, slow ice ages, and into the brief warm period where human civilization flickers into being. The strange alien landscapes of the past recede, replaced by the familiar coastlines, the mountains and plains of our own world. The thick, potent air of the Carboniferous thins out, replaced by the crisp, clean air that our own lungs are perfectly adapted to breathe. The profound silence of the coal swamps gives way to the familiar symphony of our own time. The sound of birdsong, the hum of insects, the distant sounds of the human world. It is a slow, peaceful return. There is no sense of hurry. We are simply allowing the dream to fade, holding on to the sense of peace and wonder it has given us. We carry the memory of that ancient world with us, not as a collection of facts, but as a feeling of immensity, of strangeness, of the boundless creativity of life, and of the deep, quiet patience of our planet. This dream of the past enriches our present, giving us a deeper sense of context and connection. The world we are returning to is the same world we left, but we see it now with new eyes, aware of the deep, sleeping stories that lie hidden all around us. As we gently surface back into our own time, we bring with us a final, powerful connection between the world we have just left and the world we inhabit now. That connection is the gift of the ancient sun, a gift that was captured and buried 300 million years ago, and which we have now unwrapped. The coal that formed from the sleeping forests of the Carboniferous is, in its essence, buried sunlight. The process of photosynthesis, which fueled those giant plants, is a way of capturing the energy of the sun's rays and storing it in the chemical bonds of organic molecules. Every leaf, every frond, every giant trunk was a small battery, charged with solar power. When these plants were buried and transformed into coal, that solar energy was not lost. It was concentrated and preserved, locked away in the black stone. For millions of years, this incredible energy reserve lay dormant in the Earth's crust. Then, in just the last few hundred years, a clever species of primate, humanity, discovered how to unlock it. We learned to dig up this black rock and to burn it. And in that act of burning, we're doing something remarkable. We're releasing the energy of a sun that shone on a world of giants. The electricity that powers the light you may be reading by, the heat that warms your home, the energy that has built our entire industrial civilization. Much of it has come from releasing the sunlight of the Carboniferous. It is a direct and physical link between two vastly different worlds. When we burn coal, we're completing a circuit that was left open for 300 million years. We are taking the product of the Earth's great inhale, and we are in a very real sense forcing a great and rapid exhale, returning that ancient carbon to the atmosphere. This connection is a source of both wonder and deep responsibility. It is wondrous to think that our lives are powered by such an ancient and epic process, but it also reminds us that this inheritance is finite, and that releasing it so quickly has consequences for the delicate balance of our own atmosphere, consequences that we are only now beginning to fully understand. The gift of the ancient sun is a powerful one, a legacy that has shaped our world for better and for worse. As we settle back into our own time and place, let us take a final conscious breath. Feel the air enter your lungs and feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest. The air we are breathing now is the air that we are made for. It is composed of roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and a small fraction of other gases. This specific mixture is the result of billions of years of planetary evolution, the product of a long and complex dance between geology and life. It is the atmosphere to which our own biology, and the biology of every creature we share the planet with, is perfectly tuned. Let us contrast this with the air of the Carboniferous. That air, with its 35% oxygen, would be a strange and dangerous substance for us. If we were to breathe it for a prolonged period, it could be toxic, a condition called oxygen toxicity, which can damage the cells in our lungs and other parts of our body. That air was a super fuel, but it was a fuel that our own engines are not designed to burn. Our bodies are calibrated for the gentle, steady 21% that our own world provides. Breathing our own air now, it feels comfortable, familiar, and right. It is like putting on a favourite sweater, perfectly fitted and comforting. It is the invisible medium that sustains us, so constant and so present that we often forget it is even there. Our journey to the Carboniferous gives us a new appreciation for this simple, miraculous substance. We can be grateful for the precise and delicate balance of our own atmosphere, for the Goldilocks conditions that make our own lives possible. The Earth has breathed many different kinds of air throughout its long history. The air of the Carboniferous was the breath that allowed for giants. The air we breathe now is the breath that allows for us. And in this simple, quiet act of breathing, we are participating in the great, continuous, life-giving rhythm of our planet. It is the most fundamental connection we have to the world around us, a constant exchange with the living system that supports us all. The giant insects of the Carboniferous may be long gone, but their legacy is not entirely lost. It lives on, in miniature form, in their modern descendants who inhabit our own world. The next time you're near a pond on a summer's day and see a dragonfly darting through the air, take a moment to look at it closely. In its shimmering wings, its huge eyes, and its powerful, agile flight, you can see a direct echo of the magnificent griffinfly. The dragonfly is a member of the same ancient order of insects, the Odonata. It shares the same basic body plan, the same predatory lifestyle, the same life cycle that begins in the water. It is a living piece of history, a tiny jewel-like reminder of the giants that once ruled the skies. When you see a humble millipede with its many legs moving in that same hypnotic wave, you're seeing a distant cousin of the colossal Arthropleura. The millipede still plays the same vital role in the ecosystem, the quiet recycler of the forest floor, just on a much more modest scale. Even the cockroach scurrying in the shadows carries an ancient legacy. Its simple, durable design has carried its lineage through 300 million years of planetary change, a testament to the power of resilience and adaptability. By looking at these modern insects with the story of the Carboniferous in our minds, our perception of them can change. They are not just simple bugs. They are the survivors, the keepers of an ancient flame. They are the representatives of lineages that are far, far older than the dinosaurs, older than the first flower, older than most of the mountains we see around us. They connect our modern, familiar world to the strange and distant past. They are a reminder that the story of life is one of continuity and transformation, of old forms adapting to new worlds. The giants may have vanished, but their essence, their blueprint for life, lives on in these small, successful and beautiful creatures that share our world today. Our journey is complete. We have drifted down through the ocean of deep time. We have walked the silent alien forests of the Carboniferous. We have marvelled at its giant inhabitants, and we have returned safely to the shores of our own time. We are left with a sense of peace and a profound sense of perspective. The story of the Earth is a long and quiet one. It is a story written not in words but in layers of rock, in the silent testimony of fossils, in the chemical composition of the air and the sea. It is a story of constant, gradual change, of worlds rising and falling, of life endlessly experimenting with new and beautiful forms. The Age of Giant Insects was just one chapter in this immense book. It was a chapter filled with a unique and tranquil beauty, a world of green silence and shimmering wings, and like all chapters, it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Knowing this story enriches our own existence. It connects us to the deep, patient rhythms of our planet. It reminds us that we are part of a narrative that is immeasurably vast and ancient. It fosters a sense of humility, of wonder, and of gratitude for our own brief, precious moment in the sun. The world feels different now. The ground beneath our feet feels deeper, filled with the sleeping stories of other ages. The air we breathe feels more precious, a delicate balance that sustains our own specific chapter of life. The familiar creatures of our own world, the dragonfly, the fern, the salamander, seem to shimmer with a new ancient significance. We have visited a dream that our planet once had, and we have returned with the memory of its peace. The Earth will continue its long, quiet story long after we are gone. There will be new chapters, new worlds, new forms of life as wonderful and as strange as any we have imagined tonight. But for now we can rest, feeling ourselves a small but meaningful part of this grand, unending and beautiful tale. And so our journey to the Age of Giant Insects comes to a peaceful close. We have walked through silent, alien forests and marvelled at the shimmering wings of creatures born from a richer, thicker air. We have seen how a world can be so different, yet still be our own. The same carbon atoms that built the giant scale trees are the atoms that build our own bodies. The patient, planetary forces that shaped their world are the same forces that shape ours. As you settle into your rest now, you can feel that deep connection. Your own quiet breathing is a part of the Earth's long, slow breath. Sleep, too, is a kind of deep time, a gentle drifting away from the surface of the day. There is nothing left to do now but to let these thoughts fade. You can release the story and simply rest. You have permission to drift off into the quiet peace of your own dreams. The story is over, and it is time for sleep. If you have found comfort in our journey tonight, I hope you will join us again for another quiet exploration. On another night, perhaps we will drift not into the past, but into the silent, starlit depths of the ocean, or journey to the far, tranquil corners of our solar system. Until then, I wish you a peaceful and restorative rest. Good night.